Chapter 570. Gong Dai's words made the woman's body tremble non-stop. She had spent 10 years. In the first 5 years, she did not dare to act rashly. Only in the latter 5 years did she dare to slowly drug him. But from Gong Dai's tone, he seemed to have known from the beginning. Then it was her. At this moment, the woman suddenly clutched her stomach and fell to the ground. Large beads of cold sweat dripped down. She clenched her teeth and screamed out loud. It was as if her clothes were riddled with holes from being bitten by something. How could Shuiyang not understand? He had spent so many years and sacrificed so many people to plant a chess piece. Not only did Gong Dai know about it, Gong Dai had even specially kept her to bait the big fish. Originally, this king did not know who she was. How could she be so stupid? But after seeing you, this king understood. Gong Dai held the small bottle of wine and raised his index finger slightly. He pointed at the woman. This king has always reciprocated politeness. The medicine you gave this king had goo worms in it. This king had given you more than 10 live goo worms. How do you feel? He was still smiling when he spoke. It was simply chilling. Evil spirit. He was an evil spirit. The woman broke out in cold sweat. Her insides were stirred as if she was being bitten by thousands of worms. She had nearly lost her rationality. And Gong Dai's smile was so faint with a trace of malice. It made her feel fear in her heart. So she could only tug at Shuiyang's clothes and beg him for help. King! I feel terrible. Save me. Gong Dai, Shuiyang's expression was terrifying. But what was even more terrifying was the fear in his eyes. He even had a smile on his lips. When did you start suspecting me? Gong Dai scoffed. He did not want to answer such a stupid question. You suddenly wanted to betray this king, so this king began suspecting you. Who asked you to not look reassuring? Shuiyang nearly vomited blood. At this moment, he was annoyed by the woman's noise. Finally, he chopped off her head. But he realized that a few worms had fallen out from her body. This scene made the black-clothed men present feel a chill down their spines. That man with an exquisite appearance who was close to a demon actually acted so viciously. And in the next second, everyone moved. The plan had failed. The only thing they could do was to protect Wang Xian and escape. The sounds of fighting sounded, but Shuiyang didn't turn back to look. He took advantage of the chaos to enter the tunnel and escape. As he walked, he took off his clothes and changed into other clothes. Then, he tore off his face. The tunnel was very dark, but Shuiyang seemed to have night vision as he walked very quickly. Gong Yimo was following behind him. She saw his movements, but she couldn't see what kind of face he had changed into. When he came out of the tunnel, the light shone on his face, making Gong Yimo's heart turn cold. Snow! It was actually him. Gong Yimo didn't expect that. His face would be as white as snow. And those people called him king. Was he her half-brother from a different mother, or her biological father who should have died? Snow was a little flustered, but he tried his best to calm himself down. He splashed the wine on his body and waved his fan as he walked on the street, looking like a noble young master. Finally he walked towards Flower Alley. There was no one in Flower Lane during the day. Snow had only come here because this was another one of his strongholds. But suddenly, someone blocked his path. He was stunned. He pretended to be drunk and turned around to leave. Who knew that someone behind him would also block his path without batting an eyelid? Gong Dai, Snow's heart turned cold. He still wanted to pretend that he didn't know him, this young master. Hush! Gong Dai's beautiful finger was placed on his lips as he squinted his eyes at him. In an instant, he charmed everyone. Don't speak. Yes, this is the look. His eyes flashed with killing intent. That exquisite face instantly became lively. It was a kind of bloodthirsty, impactful, heart-palpitating beauty. This is the smile. Gong Dai sipped a mouthful of wine. It will never change. When he said that, Snow panicked. The people behind Gong Dai had already rushed forward to strangle him. Snow was shocked and terrified. He didn't understand how Gong Dai could be so sure that it was him. His human skin mask was real human skin. There shouldn't be any flaws. So while he was frantically dodging, he was still cheering in his heart. This young master. We have no enmity. Why do you want to kill me? He was still trying to quibble. Gong Dai had already turned around. The wind blew his black robe and the early summer sun shone on his silver embroidery. He narrowed his eyes and looked up. The sun shone on his pale face, giving him an illusion that he didn't look like a real person. If there is no enmity, then there is no enmity. He lowered his eyes and drank the last drop of wine in the bottle. His thin red lips curled into a smile. No matter what, I want you to die. So, you must die. Even if you killed the wrong person, you can go cry to the king of hell. Snow knew that there was no use pretending to be a fool. His mind quickly turned and he suddenly said, Your Highness. Don't kill me. I still have use for it. I know where the immortal medicine is. I know a lot of secrets. It was a pity that Gong Dai didn't even turn his head. He seemed to have drunk a little too much as his footsteps were slightly messy. He coldly thought that since it was a secret, shouldn't he bring it to the coffin? As for why Shui Yang did this, sorry, that wasn't interesting at all. He didn't want to know. Gong Yimo walked beside Gong Dai and couldn't help smiling. How come she didn't realize in her past life that Gong Dai was such an interesting person? The crisis was easily resolved and Gong Yimo felt relaxed. Looking at Gong Dai's back, she suddenly felt a little lonely. It was lonely at the top. Perhaps this was the true portrayal of Gong Dai. He thirsted for opponents and wanted to control everything in his hands. He was such a tyrannical and ruthless man, but he didn't have any friends. Gong Dai walked on the street and stunned countless people. Almost no one knew what the regent looked like. Because when the regent appeared, they didn't dare to look up. So at this time, Gong Dai was walking on the street and no one recognized him. But when he walked towards them, they all subconsciously avoided him because of his inviolable noble aura and his aggressive handsomeness. It made people feel a sense of danger. Many women were foolishly looking at him, but no one dared to approach him. Gong Yimo watched him slowly walk towards the regent's residence. Looking at the women who followed him, her gaze changed from surprise to fear. That was the regent. Looking at him again, weren't they afraid of losing their heads? Gong Yimo snickered. The 30-year-old Gong Dai, that kind of evil and cold temperament and the noble domineering aura of a mature man, no one could resist. When the regent's residence's housekeeper saw Gong Dai return, he quickly came forward to report the situation. Your Highness, that group of Snow Clan people has surrendered. They also told us where the other Snow Clan people are. I think that by this time tomorrow, they will all be eradicated. Chapter 571. Gong Dai washed his hands with a basin of water brought over by a maidservant. He rubbed his hands dry and replied with an indifferent The steward continued, the ascension of the new emperor is going smoothly. Moreover, the most senior officials have also expressed their stance. They said that the new emperor is still young, so everything still depends on your highness. In other words, they had finally switched sides to Gong Dai's camp. From now on, there would be no more voices of opposition. Because those who opposed were all dead. Gong Dai replied with another and walked back to his residence like a wandering ghost. The steward followed behind him and reported everything in detail. When he finally finished, he braced himself and asked a question. Your Highness, now that the matter has been settled, everyone hopes that Your Highness can also get married and have children and settle down. Your Highness, what do you think? He was a senior official in the prince's residence, so he still had some face in front of Gong Dai. At this moment, he slightly relaxed his expression and said humbly, Jinshi of Gojoseon has written many letters, hoping that Your Highness can officially get married and take care of you. There were many women in the prince's residence. Most of them fawned over Gong Dai. The women sent to him were all beautiful and multi-talented. However, His Highness didn't like any of them. After so many years, no matter how hard those women tried, none of them left a mark in His Highness's heart. His Highness probably didn't even know their names. Gong Dai chuckled. Under the warm sun among the flowers in the courtyard, his beauty surpassed the rays of light. However, when he laughed, he suddenly thought of a woman who was even more passionate than the morning sun. Her brows seemed to contain a vast world. Even though her hands were stained with blood, which made her look hesitant, ferocious, and painful, he still felt that there was no woman in the world who was cleaner than her. They don't deserve it. The steward was instantly speechless. Gong Dai snorted coldly and continued walking. He felt that there was no woman in the world who deserved him. Not to mention marrying him. It was simply wishful thinking. Perhaps there was one. But it wasn't his. Since he was going to die anyway, he didn't care. When it came to Gong Yimo, he couldn't describe how he felt about her. No matter if it was because he had hurt her, acknowledged her, schemed against her, or was stunned by her for a moment, it was all in the past. After all, he was already dead. He wouldn't keep thinking about someone else's woman, and he wouldn't delve into why he felt these feelings for her. He didn't regret killing her, because she had already died after coming down from the battlefield. Her eyes were filled with holes and she couldn't see any signs of life. He also didn't sympathize with her, because that woman was the same as him. She didn't need such a ridiculous thing like sympathy. Seeing that Gong Dai didn't speak, the steward didn't dare to say anything more. If she wasn't worthy, then she wasn't worthy. Perhaps one day Wang Ye would take a fancy to someone. Just as he was about to bow and leave, Gong Dai suddenly called out to him. Pass down this prince's order to the ministers and ministers. Legislate and draft laws according to the military plans. Yes. On this point, the steward didn't have any objections. He had also seen the military plans. It was really hard to believe that such a complete set of laws and arrangements in the court came from a woman's hands. Gong Yimo's talent was rare. No wonder she and Wang Ye each occupied half of the country when she was alive. Yes, in the eyes of Gong Dai's subordinates, Gong Yimo was the one who was on equal footing with Gong Dai. Whether it was her intelligence, strategy, or decisiveness. That woman was someone they were wary of, but they couldn't help but admire. Sometimes they would think that if Wang Ye wasn't so proud and took Gong Yimo from the emperor's hands, perhaps he would be a different person. But Gong Dai was such a proud person. Gong Yimo had done everything for Gong Che. Whether he was jealous or admired Gong Yimo, he definitely wouldn't do anything to her. His pride didn't allow it, but it was also out of respect for Gong Yimo. So they would only be opponents, and they wouldn't stop until one of them was dead. Pass down this prince's order. The new emperor has ascended the throne. The people will be pardoned and exempted from taxes for 3 years. The steward was delighted and said with a trembling voice, yes. He knew that Gong Ju was sometimes ruthless, but he was still kind to those who had no strength to truss a chicken and posed no threat to him. Gong Ju blinked, then thought of something and said, pass down this prince's order. The imperial examinations will be reformed. In addition to studying, there will be 3 new subjects: arithmetic, agriculture, and business. Have the various departments of the imperial court perfect the subjects and textbooks. Dayu State doesn't need pillars of the nation who only know how to recite poems and write essays. Yes. The steward was very much in agreement. He also hated those who only knew how to drop books and play mind games. In addition, make sex a forbidden item. Strictly prohibit self-control. Establish a fire bureau and strictly control it. If there are any special uses, such as building roads, they must be reported for approval. If there are any violations, they will be executed immediately. Yes. The steward remembered everything carefully. Seeing that Gong Dai had been silent for a long time, he thought that was about it. Because he was in a hurry to discuss these measures that would benefit the nation and the people, he asked, "Does your highness have any other orders?" Gong Dai stood in front of the door, deep in thought. "I heard that Su Miaolan had the Grand Scribe tamper with the facts and mislead the future generations. Pass down the order to burn those and have the Grand Scribe rewrite them." Gong Dai's voice was very low when he said this. The steward suddenly remembered that the only thing that Su Miaolan had the Grand Scribe tamper with was about Gong Yimo. Su Miaolan wanted the Grand Scribe to smear Gong Yimo's name. She wanted the future generations to think that Gong Yimo was a terrifying woman who deliberately started wars for her ambition and caused rivers of blood to flow. She even said that Gong Yimo's death in the end had nothing to do with her. Gong Yimo deserved it. The commoners wanted to get rid of her as soon as possible. When they heard that she was dead, they celebrated. She even molded herself into a gentle and kind empress. She said that Gong Che could not have become emperor without her many years of assistance. She also said that she and the emperor were deeply in love and that Gong Yimo had used schemes to seize him from the start. She was shameless. And now, the prince had specially asked him to prove the truth. The steward felt very complicated. There was no man who did not want to leave his name in history. There was no man who liked to be compared to others, let alone a woman. But it had to be said that in this era, Gong Yimo was a woman, but she was more dazzling than any man. She had done it before, but she had made more contributions. She had pacified the 4 countries and unified the world. She had greatly promoted the integration of different races. She had promoted industrial development. She had brought Dayu State into a new era. An era of development. She had also left behind a military map that was enough to benefit Dayu State for thousands of years. She had laid the foundation for a prosperous era. The positive effects she had brought about were too many to count. It was difficult to record. As long as she did not rewrite history, her contributions would be written down by the future generations. Because she was a woman, because of her feats, she would become the only legend of this era. Now that the political situation had just been settled and there were many things waiting to be done, the prince had given such an order. Was Gong Yimo different in the prince's heart? Chapter 572. The butler let out a silent sigh. Then do you want to edit it? What the butler meant was, should he only record Gong Yimo's achievements in history and gloss over her mistakes? Gong Dai was a little impatient and he frowned. No need, just write it as it is. Her achievements and mistakes will be judged by future generations. With that, he pushed open the door and went in, obviously wanting to be alone. The butler answered with a yes and then respectfully left. Before he left, he was still thinking, if Gong Yimo's spirit in heaven found out that the person who cleared her name was actually her opponent and the person who killed her, how would she feel? Sigh, the more he thought about it, the more pitiful it was. That was a person like the rising sun. She had fallen too quickly, leaving behind countless sighs. Gong Yimo listened from the side and was shocked. She really did not expect that Gong Dai would do this. He acknowledged her achievements, affirmed her life, cleared her name, and cleared her name. Of course, the trauma she had suffered could not be erased, but his actions made her feel very gratified. Suddenly, she felt that her trip here was really worth it. But she did not know if all of this was real or if it was just her imagination. Was it just a pipe dream? She went through the door and found Gong Dai lying on the bed with his clothes on. He was frowning, looking as if he was puzzled. He was puzzled as to why he did what he did and gave such an order. What a tsundere, Gong Yimo thought proudly. Perhaps in this life, Gong Dai also had some feelings for her. Maybe he even worshipped her. It was just that Gong Dai was too tsundere to say it. Maybe he loved her so much that he hated her so much that he could not wait to kill her. Ha ha ha. Gong Yimo was amused by her own thoughts. She blinked and stared at Gong Dai, laughing secretly. But she did not know why, but the more she looked at him, the more she missed Gong Dai from the other world. That Gong Dai who was also cold, tsundere, and sharp-tongued, she missed him so much. He was the one who would treat her well wholeheartedly, and he was also her lover. Gong Yimo sat beside Gong Dai's bed. She looked at his eyes and thought that when Gong Dai was 30 years old, he should look like this, right? Mature, mischievous, cold, and handsome. It was as if he had gathered the essence of heaven and earth to create a face that could captivate the world. He had also gathered the darkness of the world to create a ruthless and heartless personality that she could not hate. She suddenly felt a little impatient. She really wanted to go back and see how her Gong Dai matured little by little, and how he slowly became the regent in front of her eyes. Thinking of this, she looked at those thin lips and suddenly had a frivolous thought. She really did that. Gong Yimo lowered her body and kissed Gong Dai gently on the lips. Gong Dai couldn't feel her, and she couldn't feel Gong Dai's body temperature. But at the moment of contact, she felt something. Gong Dai suddenly opened his eyes. "Who are you?" His eyes were like lightning. In an instant, the domineering aura that belonged to the great regent was earth-shattering. Gong Yimo, who was trapped in it, felt a little breathless. He clearly felt someone approaching him just now. Who was it? Who was approaching him? Gong Yimo finally got used to his terrifying murderous aura. She smiled gently and went forward boldly. She hugged his neck and acted coquettishly. "Gong Dai. Guess who I am?" She knew that Gong Dai couldn't hear her, but Gong Dai could only think of one person in his bewilderment. Only one person could be so bold. She dared to approach him in his sleep. Gong Yimo. Gong Yimo was suddenly stunned. When Gong Dai saw that no one responded, he frowned and shouted again as if he was possessed. "Gong Yimo." Gong Yimo suddenly felt dizzy. In her daze, she seemed to hear another voice calling her name. Gong Yimo. Gong Yimo gradually felt a headache coming on. She curled up and looked at Gong Dai, who was calmly looking around. However, his appearance became more and more blurry and was getting further and further away. Gong Yimo. Gong Yimo. Who was it? Who was calling her? Gong Dai's bed was getting further and further away from her and gradually disappeared. She felt a sense of loss. She knew that after leaving this time, she would never come back. Her body sank into darkness and she couldn't see her direction. Only a familiar voice was calling her name over and over again, Gong Yimo. Wake up. Gong Yimo. Wake up. It was as if she was falling heavily from the sky. Gong Yimo's upper body leaned forward and she suddenly opened her eyes. Her eyes had a trace of confusion. Her mind seemed to have an additional memory that didn't belong to her. She seemed to have returned to her previous life, to the world after her death. Before she could wake up, a storm-like kiss landed on her urgently. Gong Ju accurately grinded her lips and eagerly sucked on her lips. She had finally woken up. He was so happy that he almost cried. Therefore, he could no longer control himself and kissed her like a madman. It was as if this was the only way he knew that she had really woken up. She was still alive. She had returned to his side. Momo, just as Gong Yimo was about to faint from lack of oxygen, Gong Dai finally let go of her and hugged her tightly. His voice was close to choking. "Don't scare me like this again, okay? Don't be like this. I really don't dare to imagine how I can live on without you." Feeling Gong Dai's rapidly beating heart, Gong Yimo felt an inexplicable sense of reality. She had really returned to Gong Dai's side. Thinking of this, she smiled and patted his back to comfort him. "Don't be afraid, I'm already back." In his panic, Gong Dai didn't notice the strangeness of her words. He only hugged her tightly and didn't want to let go. Gong Yimo had been unconscious for 4 days and he couldn't wake her up no matter what. She slept so peacefully and her breathing was even. Her little face was flushed red as if she would wake up in the next second, but he had endured for 4 days. Only God knew how he had endured these 4 days. Just as they were reunited after a short separation and at this moment of deep affection, an untimely voice suddenly rang out. Gong Dai was stunned. Gong Yimo touched her stomach embarrassedly and said innocently, "Although I really want to hug you again, I'm a little hungry." Gong Dai burst out laughing. His eyes were still bloodshot and there was even stubble on his chin. Gong Yimo then realized that Gong Dai could actually grow a beard. It was just that he had always tidied himself up properly and was so clean that Gong Yimo almost forgot that Gong Dai was a mature man. He couldn't help but touch Gong Yimo's head a few times, rubbing and pinching it. After confirming that she was indeed alive and kicking, he finally relaxed a little. "Lie down for a while. Don't sleep, I'll be right there." He was really afraid that Gong Yimo would sleep for another 4 days. That would be too scary. Gong Yimo's little head nodded rapidly. Hurry, I want to eat meat, I'm starving." Gong Dai looked at her dotingly and really sped off. Chapter 573. These few days, he had been feeling restless, so Snow did not dare to pester him and went silent. Gong Ju thought to himself. He didn't know if Gong Ju's crushed arm had recovered. If such an injury could be healed, then Sister Gong was likely to have obtained such a terrifying recovery ability. Gong Yimo lay in the stone room and beneath her was that huge black holy stone. Gong Yimo laid on top of it and realized that there was really a glowing thing inside. Was that the stone heart? It was said that it appeared together with her. How interesting. And that dream. Was that dream really from her previous life? If it was really the scene from her previous life, then it would be great. She would have created a peaceful world and not left the world riddled with holes. Furthermore, the people she hated the most had been punished. She was satisfied. Thinking of this, Gong Yimo kissed the holy stone. "I hope that what you brought me to see is real. But no matter if it is real or not, I am thankful to you for being able to see that scene." After kissing, Gong Yimo saw that under the holy stone, there were many snow-white mushroom-like things. Could this be the snow Ganoderma? Gong Yimo's eyes lit up. Father could be saved. She had collected a lot of it and stored it in her space. The stone in her heart had finally been lifted. She had achieved her goal and was overjoyed. She obediently laid on the stone bed and waited for Gong Dai. She had to admit that this stone made her feel very close to it. When Gong Dai returned, he saw this scene. Gong Yimo was lying on the stone bed reading a book. Her 2 snow-white legs were sticking up and down. Because Gong Dai's trousers were too long for her, Gong Yimo did not wear any trousers under her robe. Wait, not only did she not wear any trousers, she did not even wear a doudou. Gong Dai's face instantly turned red. Smelling the fragrance, Gong Yimo raised her head and saw that Gong Dai had returned. Her eyes lit up. So fast. Great. Her little nose twitched as she exclaimed. Roasted chicken. I love chicken the most. Gong Dai hurriedly stepped forward. Not only did he go out to cook, but he also cleaned himself up. His entire person was refreshed, and he was once again that handsome man who was clean and untainted by a speck of dust. He hugged Gong Yimo in his arms and refused to let her do it herself. Instead, he let her lean on him. He tore the chicken apart bit by bit, blew on it slightly to cool it down, and put it in her mouth. Why did he feel like he was raising a pet? Gong Yimo shook his head and tried to get rid of the illusion. She reached out to touch Gong Dai's chin and asked incoherently. How did you shave your beard? Could it be that Gong Dai carried a razor with him? Gong Dai's face was slightly embarrassed. He didn't answer and instead stuffed another piece of meat into her mouth. Seeing her touching and looking at him in his arms, Gong Dai felt a little uncomfortable. His body gradually reacted, but he didn't dare to say anything. He bent his legs and continued to feed her. After all, she had just woken up, so he had to bear with it. Sigh. Raising a royal sister was like raising a daughter. Gong Dai expressed that he was very much looking forward to his future life after marriage. Gong Yimo suddenly thought of something. As she ate, she turned her palm and took out a piece of dessert. Gong Dai's expression didn't change. He just thought that she was a little tired of eating meat and was using dessert to suppress the grease. Gong Yimo sat up and looked at him. What's wrong? Gong Dai blinked his beautiful black jade eyes. His voice was cold and gentle as if it could drip water. Gong Yimo carefully looked at his face. The current Gong Dai didn't have the evil, flamboyant, and sharp look that he had in her previous life. Instead, he was more cold, gentle, and clean. He was like a white lotus on a snowy mountain, making people unable to take their eyes off him. Gong Yimo sighed. Whether it was the 17-year-old Gong Dai or the 30-year-old Gong Dai, they both had their own beauty. They were equally matched. When Gong Ju was only 30 years old, his beauty seemed to radiate radiance, making everyone's heart palpitate. But the Gong Ju in front of her, his beauty and gentleness were only for her. This feeling is amazing. Gong Yimo smiled mischievously and fed him the dessert. Seeing that you haven't eaten a single bite, you eat too. Gong Dai didn't think there was a problem. Without changing his expression, he gently bit off half of the dessert and fed a piece of meat to Gong Yimo. Gong Yimo puffed up her cheeks. As she ate the meat, she observed his expression. Seeing that he really swallowed the dessert without any resistance, Gong Yimo was a little stunned. Gong Dai took her hand and put the rest of the dessert in his mouth. That sickeningly sweet taste spread in his mouth. Gong Dai was already used to it. Gong Yimo suddenly asked. Gong Dai. You actually hate sweets, right? After Gong Yimo asked this, her expression was a little strained. She really wasn't a qualified breeder. After so many years, she actually didn't know his taste. She really thought that he would like to eat whatever she liked. What a failure, Gong Dai was stunned. Then, he didn't know whether to shake his head or nod. He naturally hated sweets, but as long as she fed him, he would eat it without batting an eyelid, even if it was poison. Seeing Gong Yimo's self-blaming appearance, his inky eyes revealed a smile. His heart instantly became soft as he continued to hold her in his embrace and fed her bit by bit. Why are you suddenly asking this? Gong Dai's hands were oily, so he was very careful when he held her. His voice was also very soft, with an unknown softness. I just suddenly wanted to confirm it. Gong Yimo sullenly replied. She didn't even feel happy eating the meat. She didn't forget what Gong Dai said when he kicked Su Miaolon aside in the dazzling palace in her dream. This king hates sweets the most. Every time you bring that disgusting thing for this king to eat, this king hates you even more. This king treats you differently, this king especially, hates you. When Gong Yimo thought of this, she couldn't help but become even more dispirited. She wanted to tell herself that it was just a dream. Gong Dai had been fed desserts by her countless times since he was young. If he really hated sweets that much, then, did he hate her in the past? Gong Yimo shivered and instantly felt wronged. Seeing that she was obsessed with this matter, Gong Dai brought the chicken to her mouth, but she didn't open her mouth. Her little mouth pursed as if she was feeling wronged. Gong Dai held back his laughter. Sometimes, he really wanted to open up the little girl in his embrace and see what kind of interesting things were in her head. He gave a pampering sigh and finally spoke in a soft voice. I naturally don't like sweets. As expected. Gong Yimo wanted to cry, but no tears came out. It really wasn't a dream. What to do? Would Gong Dai think that she didn't care about him at all? After all these years, she actually didn't pay attention to this detail. Seeing her slightly flustered appearance, Gong Dai couldn't help lowering his head to kiss her forehead. But every time you feed me desserts, they're stained with your taste. I can't wait to swallow the desserts in your fingers together, so how could I remember if they're sweet or not? Chapter 574. That one sentence almost made Gong Yimo's hair stand on end. It was really hard for her to imagine that there would be such a cause and effect. She saved Gong Dai's voice, and Gong Dai used that lousy voice of his to tease her. However, she could not resist at all, and her little heart was beating very fast. Gong Yimo even felt dizzy and out of breath. She was really too useless. She was in a daze, but she did not forget the main point. Then do you like to eat sweets now? Gong Yimo thought that if he did not change this habit after so many years, she should be more careful in the future and not force him. Gong Dai chuckled softly. His unique and elegant voice echoed in the stone room, and Gong Yimo wished she could cover her ears. It was better than being teased by his laughter until she could not breathe. I like it. He kissed her hair and told her with certainty, as long as it's from you, I like it, so he still doesn't like sweets. Gong Yimo was conflicted. She twisted her 2 fingers and asked after a while, then in the past. I didn't know about this. Do you think that I don't care about you at all? Actually, it was not like that. She was a person who did not pay attention to the details. Otherwise, she would not have ended up like that in her previous life. Gong Dai hugged her lovingly and rubbed against her. He felt that he could no longer focus on feeding her food. She was so cute that he just wanted to eat her up. Eat her up. My royal sister has never been a person who pays attention to the details since she was young. She was broad-minded, and it was destined that no matter how meticulous she was, it would only be reflected in the big things. And it's not that you don't care about me. It's me who wants to be like you. Whatever you like, I like. Gong Yimo was even more embarrassed by his words, and she twisted in his arms. She knew that Gong Dai was comforting her. She also knew that she lacked the emotional intelligence to deal with people and the meticulous observation. Sometimes she would get carried away. Gong Dai, on the other hand, was different. He was also a very strong person. His strength was so strong that he could conquer the world. He could notice any of her small habits. Just like this chicken. She didn't like to eat its internal organs and hated the smell. He was a man, but when he was handling it, he would specially look for some deodorant. He would dig out all the internal organs, wrap them in fragrant leaves and roast them. Then, he would smear honey on them and roast them, and send them to her. Gong Yimo was not a pretentious person. When it was time to act, she would not hesitate. That was why she had never said that she hated having her hands covered in grease. Well, no one would like that, right? Therefore, Gong Dai refused to do it himself. Instead, he tore apart the chicken and fed it to her. Therefore, compared to Gong Yi, who was meticulous, she was indeed a little lacking. Sighing, Gong Yimo repeatedly reminded herself not to feed him snacks in the future. She must remember. Looking at Gong Yimo, Gong Dai put the chicken aside and sighed. My baby, don't you understand? Gong Yimo looked up at him. When their eyes met, she suddenly remembered how flirtatious the way he addressed her. Her face flushed red. She wasn't shy. Gong Dai liked her obedient and shy look the most. He kissed her lips. What I mean is, I like sweet things. Gong Yimo widened her eyes and made a pufferfish expression. That angry look was clearly saying that Gong Dai was coaxing her like a child. Gong Ju sucked her lips into his mouth, tossing and turning sweetly. After a long while, he rubbed his lips against hers and sighed vaguely. Is there anything sweeter than you? My little fool. Ah. Her sweetness had long surpassed countless desserts. He liked to eat her, so how could he dislike the taste of sweetness? Gong Yimo came back to her senses and blushed. Could he not flirt with her so easily? She couldn't take it anymore. At this moment, the stone room was very quiet. Only the sound of Gong Dai sucking on her lips could be heard. It was so flirtatious that it made one's heart itch. You don't want to eat anymore? Gong Dai asked softly. Gong Yimo was kissed into a puddle of spring water by him. She was already unconscious. Gong Dai moved the big leaf that wrapped the chicken further away. He carefully looked at her face and felt that he couldn't get enough of looking at her. Gong Yimo seemed to be burned by his gaze. She quickly changed her target. However, she saw that his fingers were still oily. She took out a handkerchief from her space. Let me help you wipe it. Gong Dai readily accepted her suggestion and passed his right hand to her. Gong Dai's hand was very beautiful. It was the right size. It was slender and fair, but it was very strong. It didn't give off the feeling of being weak. There were many calluses between his fingers. Some were from holding a sword, some were from holding a pen. His fingernails were very neatly trimmed and his hands were very clean. However, there was a hint of oil on them. There was a hint of honey in the oil. It must have been hard on him. In such a short time, he even went to find honey to roast the chicken. This man really placed her at the top of his heart and loved her dearly. Gong Yimo clearly felt Gong Dai tremble. What are you doing? He seemed to be in a daze. Was he dreaming when he felt something soft and smooth on his fingers? Gong Yimo saw his innocent look. Her heart itched and she became even bolder. She looked into Gong Dai's eyes again. She boldly and tentatively licked his index finger clean in front of him. She wasn't done yet. She licked his fingers one by one. Under Gong Dai's burning gaze, not only did she finish licking all 5 of his fingers, she even licked his palm. That hot and itchy feeling made Gong Dai retract his hand. Gong Yimo grabbed his hand and used a handkerchief to wipe his hand. During the process, both of them were embarrassed and kept quiet. It was just a small seduction, but the air seemed to be on fire. It surrounded both of them, making their breathing a little erratic. Gong Yimo even lowered her head in frustration as she wiped his hand. What was wrong with her just now? Was she seduced by his beauty? How could she be so bold and seduce him like that? On the other hand, Gong Dai was still in a daze. It was as if he was still reminiscing about the way she licked his finger. Her cheeks were pink, her gaze was blurry, and her long eyelashes fluttered. She made his breathing a little messy. He kept thinking that she had just woken up and was still very weak. However, his beloved baby was so seductive that he almost couldn't control himself. Seeing that Gong Dai didn't say anything for a long time, Gong Yimo secretly raised her head and pretended to glance at him. However, she couldn't take it anymore. She realized that Gong Dai was staring at her like a hungry wolf. That extremely invasive gaze caused her pupils to shrink as if she was frightened. Chapter 575. Gong Yimo wanted to lower her head to say something, but something was fiercely stuffed into her mouth. It was Gong Dai's left hand. He directly and somewhat domineeringly stuffed his finger into her mouth, but his face slowly smiled. That cold and enchanting look was so beautiful that it was unreal. His voice was also unreal. "Royal sister, my left hand, I also want you to lick it clean." At that moment, Gong Yimo's heart raced. Her eyes seemed to be firmly sucked in by him, and she stared unblinkingly into his dark eyes. She really wanted to lick the honey on his finger, but her attention was no longer on his finger, but on Gong Dai's eyes. His eyes seemed to be able to bewitch people's hearts. Black and white were distinct, and that black ball kept entangling her deeper and deeper, entangling her until she fell forever. In an instant, the world turned upside down. Unknowingly, Gong Dai was actually pressing her under his body. That scorching body temperature made Gong Yimo's entire body tense up. She wanted to say something, but Gong Dai evilly stirred in her mouth, his fingers hooking, as if he was French kissing her. Gong Dai pressed down on her body, his other hand used his elbow to support his face on the stone bed. Just like that, he stared at her passionately and wickedly, making her want to curl up in fear. The cold person suddenly became enchanting, as if it could make people suffocate. "Royal sister, you don't seem to remember anything." Gong Yimo's cheeks flushed red, and it took her a while to understand his words. "Don't remember." She remembered. Seeing that Gong Yimo wanted to answer, Gong Dai mercifully took out his finger, but used the tip of his finger to trace her lips, making her want to bite him. "I still remember. We came to get the snow rasher mushroom." Gong Yimo snorted after saying that. Could it be that Gong Dai thought that she had been seduced by his man and didn't know anything? Little did she know that beneath him, this arrogant snort was like a little kitten, tickling Gong Dai's heart little by little, and the smile on his face widened. "And?" he whispered into Gong Yimo's ear. That low and hoarse voice made Gong Yimo's body tense up even more. It also felt like it was about to melt. "There's more." She tilted her head and looked at Gong Dai. Her eyes were bright and she seemed to be confused. At this moment, their breaths were intertwined and any sound in the stone room would be amplified. Gong Dai looked at Gong Yimo passionately and reminded her in a hoarse voice. "By the pool." Gong Yimo blinked her eyes in confusion. Only then did Gong Dai realize that she had forgotten about their first time. This was really intolerable. The gentle smile on his face suddenly froze, and in the next second, it became devilish with a hint of anger. With a flip, he completely pressed down on Gong Yimo's body. "Royal sister, you really don't remember." Feeling his anger, Gong Yimo felt wronged. She nervously clasped her hands in front of her chest, and strangely didn't dare to look at him. What should I remember?" She had consumed the goo poison, and when she woke up, she was already here. Gong Dai simply sat on top of her, and held up one of her hands. Her sleeve slid open, and her snow-white forearm was exposed, setting off his watery gaze. "Didn't you realize that something is missing?" Gong Yimo stared at her white and tender arm a few times. She actually didn't have a single wound on it. Didn't her hand get stuck in the stone door? She even cut her wound and let it bleed. How did it heal just like that? Amazing. Gong Yimo's eyes became brighter and brighter. Gong Dai, I realized that my healing ability has suddenly become very strong. Gong Dai was so angry that he lowered his head and fiercely bit her lips. Suddenly, his hands became rough, and he violently tore off her clothes. Gong Yimo was shocked, and instinctively covered her chest, but it was useless. Gong Dai looked at her exposed skin, panting and angrily asking, "Do you remember it now?" Gong Yimo widened her eyes and didn't answer. She felt that Gong Dai seemed to be unable to hold back. His passion and eagerness made her body tense up, and she didn't know what to do. What should I remember? Gong Yimo asked carefully, and she wanted to cry, but no tears came out. Gong Dai suddenly became angry. He tore off his clothes, revealing his exquisite collarbone, and Gong Yimo couldn't help but gasp. What was Gong Dai trying to do? Didn't he say that he wanted to wait until the wedding, before doing that? While Gong Yimo was in a daze, Gong Dai removed the silver crown on his head. The silver crown fell to the ground, making a dull sound. Amidst the sparkling pearls, Gong Dai's black hair instantly poured down. It landed on his shoulders, and that little bit of charm in the cold and cheerless air made him not look like a demon, but more like a demon. At this moment, his hair was dazzling, and there was a faint light in his drooping eyes. He stared at Gong Yimo as if he had locked onto his prey, and his red lips were slightly curved. At this moment, Gong Yimo almost couldn't suppress her heartbeat, so much that her ears were filled with the sound of her own frantic heartbeat. Did he have to be so beautiful? She was really going to suffocate. However, what she didn't know was that she was also very beautiful. Her fair and tender skin, her watery eyes, and those full lips were all driving Gong Dai crazy. He gently lifted Gong Yimo's chin with one finger, and Gong Yimo nervously and stiffly raised her head along with his finger. When her eyes met with Gong Dai's, she could see the desire in his eyes that seemed to want to tear her apart. It made one's heart palpitate, but also, she was faintly looking forward to it. His thumb rubbed against her lips, and his voice was like the best lust. "Does it still hurt?" Gong Dai was referring to the matter of him biting her just now. He had used a little bit of strength just now, and her lower lip seemed to be a little swollen. It was really delicate. Gong Yimo subconsciously held her breath because he was so close to her. She was like a flower with dew, biting her lip and nodding delicately. "It hurts." She subconsciously acted coquettishly again. "Darling, you're hurting me." She thought that Gong Dai would stop this dangerous beauty and pull her into his arms, but who knew that Gong Dai would give her a mischievous smile. "Not only will I hurt you, I'll also make you cry." Ah! With a tearing sound, Gong Yimo's clothes were instantly torn apart. She wasn't wearing anything underneath. Wasn't this too embarrassing? Before she could get used to it, Gong Dai had already endured to the brink of collapse. He couldn't hold it in any longer, so he directly took off his clothes and entered her body. Gong Yimo instantly screamed. Gong Dai was so talented, she would die. The tearing sensation came as expected, but it wasn't the legendary feeling of being split in half. At this moment, Gong Dai's voice rang in her ears. "Are you wondering why it doesn't hurt?" Gong Yimo nodded foolishly, then shook her head. "It still hurts." Her soft and coquettish voice made Gong Dai's breathing heavier. "Little vixen, let me help you recall how you were on top of me for a day and a night." Gong Dai kissed her fiercely. "You want to deny it after eating me? Royal sister, you took me by force. In this life, you're mine." Chapter 576. Gong Yimo was shocked beyond words by his words. She felt inexplicably ashamed. When had she ever gone back on her words? Since when did she force herself on him for an entire day and night? Even if you wrongly accuse someone, you shouldn't do it like this. However, her voice was immediately shattered. There was no day or night in the stone room, only a man who was like a tireless beast. However, the echo effect was very good. Those ambiguous sounds echoed over and over again, making people blush. Gong Yimo tried her best to suppress her desire, but her mind gradually recalled how she had pressed down on Gong Dai when she had gone crazy. Scary. It was actually true. And she even took out a whip. Oh my God. She actually took out a whip. She did not have any queen-like tendencies, she had always thought of herself as a little fresh. Gong Dai's passionate kiss fell from the sky, almost robbing her of her breath. Baby, you're not focused. His eyes were bloodshot and his hair was slightly messy, but at this moment, he looked so tyrannical. He was no longer gentle, and gradually became so intense that Gong Yimo could not help but moan softly. That coquettish voice was like the most intense aphrodisiac, enough to drive people crazy. Gong Dai's entire body was burning, and there was a crazy thought in his mind. He wanted Gong Yimo to only see him, to only think of him, and to only focus on him. Melt under his body. After being pressed down for an unknown period of time, Gong Yimo finally experienced the legendary feeling of her body falling apart, and in a daze, she felt that Gong Dai had even carried her to wash up. She was shy. She did not have the face to see anyone. She was really eaten up by Gong Dai. Gong Dai looked amusedly at the person in his arms who had been pretending to be an ostrich after waking up. How could she be so lovable? He could not have enough of her no matter how much he wanted her. Hugging like this, Gong Yimo realized that a certain beast actually had a reaction. She lamented in her heart, should she say that he was really worthy of being the great regent? He was really better than others in every aspect, bastard. Turn around right now. Gong Yimo could not deceive herself anymore. She wanted to get up and put on her clothes, but Gong Dai stared at her and smiled, and she was so embarrassed that she could not control herself. Once she spoke, she realized that her voice was so hoarse, and Gong Yimo became even angrier. Bastard, quickly turn around, this princess wants to put on her clothes. Gong Dai lay on his side with a smile, and said temptingly. Your Highness, let me help you change your clothes. That flirtatious voice made Gong Yimo blush. Turn. Turn. She started punching and kicking and she wanted Gong. Although it was said that she was punching and kicking, she didn't use any strength at all. Okay. I'll turn around. Don't be shy, baby. Gwen, given, turned, and turned. It was enough to make all the women in the world jealous. When Gong Yimo saw that he really turned around, she quickly took out her clothes from her space and quickly put them on. Hateful. Gong Ju tossed her around all night. Even when she fought with others, she didn't feel so sore. The more she thought about it, the angrier Gong Yimo became. She wanted to kick Gong Dai, but was stopped halfway by Gong Dai. He grabbed her white and tender foot and raised his eyebrows slightly. Princess, do you want me to put on your shoes for you? Gong Yimo wanted to retract her foot, but Gong Dai held on tightly. She did not have the strength, so she could only angrily scold him. Gong Xiaoju, how come I didn't realize that you were such a beast before? Gong Dai smiled gently, charming all living beings. Royal sister, you didn't realize it, but you didn't know that I, your brother, have wanted to do this to you for a long time. Gong Yimo's face instantly turned red. She suddenly remembered that Gong Dai had liked her for many years. Maybe he really has been thinking about her for a long time. Gong Dai stopped teasing her and directly got up. He was wearing a pair of trousers and his black hair was draped over his back. Getting off the stone bed, he held Gong Yimo's foot and knelt on the ground on one knee. His upper body leaned forward, and even his hair poured down. Gong Yimo could not see his expression, but she could feel his concentration. He gently helped her put on her shoes. His movements were gentle, as if he was treating the world's most precious treasure. Gong Yimo endured the heat from his palms and let him help her put on her shoes. She looked at the top of his head. Even though he was kneeling on the ground, his posture was still tall and straight. This man had matured, and he was hers. She felt embarrassed just thinking about it. She covered her face. The two of them were lovey-dovey in the stone room for a while. Now that the snow Ganoderma was in their hands, it was time for them to leave. But Gong Dai looked at the huge holy stone thoughtfully. He thought of Snow's words. He said that this stone heart could control Royal Sister? No, it was definitely nonsense. But they had already entered and the stone heart was in front of them. If they did not take it away, they would feel bad. When Gong Yimo heard Gong Dai's words, she also felt that it would be safer for the stone heart to be in their hands. Gong Dai nodded his head and carried Gong Yimo to the side. Then he walked in front of the huge holy stone and gathered his chi in his dantian. He decided to use his inner strength to shatter this huge stone. Gong Yimo watched from the side and felt nervous for no reason. Gong Dai's inner strength was strong and he chopped down with his palm. The entire stone room was filled with the sound of the stone shattering. Gong Yimo opened her eyes wide to look and saw the black stone bed slowly cracking, revealing a red light. Gong Dai took a deep breath and chopped down with his palm again. This time, the entire stone bed was split open. The red light became brighter and brighter, revealing its true appearance. Stone heart, it was not big, only the size of a baby's fist. Moreover, Gong Dai took out a cloth and wrapped it around his hand. When he reached out to take the stone heart, he found that it was soft. When he spread it out on his palm, it looked like a pool of blood. Gong Yimo came over to take a look. After trying a few times, she found that this thing could not be placed into her space. She poked at the stone heart in annoyance but found that it was like jelly. Moreover, the moment it touched her finger, the red light disappeared. The two of them looked at each other, feeling puzzled. Just as Gong Yimo wanted to say something, they heard a loud sound. The entire stone door of the cave was kicked open. The two of them quickly retreated. Another loud sound was heard. A huge stone smashed onto the holy stone. When the two stones collided, the holy stone immediately shattered. A loud explosion was heard. It was Blind. Blind, who only had one arm left, was clearly abnormal. His eyes were red. Clearly, he had also consumed the goo poison. Gong Dai instantly thought of Snow. He did not know if Blind was willing to be poisoned, or if he was instigated by someone. However, it was clearly not a good time to find out the truth. Blind's martial arts were above Gong Yimo's. Furthermore, he had consumed the goo poison to go berserk. However, with Gong Dai around, the two of them were still able to fight Blind to a draw. Gong Dai intentionally blocked Gong Yimo behind him. He did not forget that the royal sister had also consumed the goo poison. If she was provoked, there was no guarantee that she would not suddenly act up. Chapter 577. Gong Yimo also knew her own situation, so she retreated as she fought, hiding behind Gong Dai. If she also went berserk, Gong Dai would be in danger. Blind's attacks were very ferocious. He was like a giant. He waved a huge knife in his hand and his eyes were completely red as if he wanted to kill all of them who had disturbed the peace of the treasure. And Snow suddenly appeared. He hid in the dark and looked at the holy stone that was crushed by the huge rock. He wasn't sure if the stone heart had been taken away by Gong Dai or if it had been crushed by the huge rock. Previously, when the blind man heard the sound of the treasure, he couldn't bear it anymore and ran out to stop Gong Ju. However, the blind man stopped him and told him that he was no match for Gong Ju. If he went in, he would die. Blind didn't listen and wanted to kill him before going in. He had guarded the treasure of Snow Clan his whole life, and even if he died, he wanted to die here. Snow saw that he had made up his mind and enticed him to consume the goo poison. Blind was moved by his words and wanted to kill him. However, because he needed him to concoct the goo poison, he endured it. Today, Snow had finally finished concocting the poison. Blind had wanted to kill him when he got the poison, but Snow had been prepared. He had smeared a paralyzing drug on the poison. When Blind could move again, Snow had already run away. On one side was the sinister and cunning Snow, and on the other side was Gong Yimo, who might have already gotten the stone heart. After weighing the pros and cons, Blind decided to kill Gong Yimo, who was a bigger threat first. Since Snow was here and he didn't know the way back, he could only be trapped here forever. That was why this scene in front of him was happening. Blind attacked fiercely without considering the consequences. He couldn't continue being passive like this. Gong Yimo gave a signal to Gong Dai with her eyes, and Gong Dai immediately understood. The two of them retreated to the door together. After retreating to the door, Gong Dai went forward to entangle Blind while Gong Yimo ignited the bomb and blew up the door. Now was the time. In the explosion, Blind couldn't tell the situation. When he saw Gong Dai retreating, he didn't retreat and instead continued to advance. Then, he was smashed by the huge stone door. He spat out a mouthful of blood. He couldn't get up even after several tries. Gong Yimo ran to Gong Dai's side, only to find that Gong Dai was also injured. "Are you all right?" Her heart ached. Gong Dai heaved a sigh of relief and stroked her hair. "I'm fine." "Ah!" Blind suddenly roared and raised his hand high up. He wanted to struggle, but he spat out another mouthful of blood. Gong Dai wanted to step forward, but was stopped by Gong Yimo. Gong Dai was injured, and she was afraid that the blind man still had the strength to fight back, so she decided to kill him herself. Blind was originally struggling, but his chest was pressed down by the huge stone, so he couldn't exert any strength. When Gong Yimo's footsteps sounded, he subconsciously raised his head. That pair of bloodshot eyes stared fiercely at Gong Yimo. At that moment, Gong Yimo felt as though his eyes could see. But she didn't care anymore. He wanted to kill her, and she had broken the treasure. Now that they were in a situation where they wouldn't rest until one of them was dead, she might as well kill him here. Gong Mo. Gong Yimo raised her sword, only to find that Blind was awake. He was spitting out mouthfuls of blood as he called out her name. "You must die," he said incoherently. "Must die. Otherwise, the world will be in chaos." Gong Yimo hated this kind of charlatan tone the most. What did he mean by she would cause the world to be in chaos? In this life, she was clearly going to be a saint. "Just wait and see on the road to the netherworld." Gong Yimo raised her sword again. "This world will only praise my merits. Destroy the world." That was already in the previous life. After saying that, Blind seemed to understand. But Gong Yimo did not give him a chance to speak and ended him with a sword. Seeing Gong Yimo being so ferocious, Snow did not dare to come out. In order to hide his figure, he had eaten one of the goo poison after making it. But even if he was in his berserk state, he was still not Gong Yimo and Gong Dai's opponent. So he had been hiding his figure, waiting to see how Gong Yimo and the rest were going to leave. Gong Yimo was also thinking about this problem. For someone as loyal as Blind, he would definitely not tell them the exit. So killing him, Gong Yimo did not feel that it was a pity. Gong Dai used this time to bandage his wound and saw Gong Yimo frowning. "What's wrong?" Gong Yimo said dejectedly. "This place is neither big nor small. What should we do if we can't find the exit?" Gong Dai smiled. He was currently sitting on the huge rock, holding her hand and hugging her to sit properly. "It's good that we can't find the exit. In this world, there's only you and me. No one else will come and snatch you away." Gong Yimo glared at him. "Can you be more serious?" The two of them were stuck in this god-forsaken place, not being able to do anything every day. Wouldn't they be bored to death? Suddenly her face turned red. "Seems like, it's not like they can't do anything." Gong Dai bit her ear. "We can even give birth to a few children to play with." Pervert. Gong Dai did not understand what Gong Yimo meant by calling him a pervert, but he knew that she definitely did not say anything good. He bit her lips a few times as a punishment. Gong Yimo could not take it anymore as she hugged his neck and bit back angrily. The two of them were simply as sweet as honey, unable to be separated. At this moment, Shuesei was feeling the same way. If the two of them wanted to flirt, couldn't they pay attention to the situation? But not only did the two of them not pay attention, the ambiguous kissing sounds were getting louder and louder. Shuesei was a little annoyed as he shifted a little. It was at this moment that Gong Dai's eyes cleared, and in the next second, he moved in front of Shuesei and slashed down with his sword. In terms of individual strength, the enraged Shuesei was still stronger than Gong Dai, so this slash was slightly avoided by Shuesei and did not hurt any vital parts. He turned around and wanted to escape, but Gong Yimo was not someone to be trifled with. This person had tried to harm her time and time again, so she would not let him off so easily. So with a slash of her sword, Shuesei was instantly heavily injured. Not sure if it was the sense of danger from death that had stimulated his potential, he actually ignored the two of them and focused on escaping. In this way, Gong Yimo and Gong Dai would definitely not be able to catch up to him. But with those two slashes, even if he did not die, he would be heavily injured. Gong Dai was deep in thought because Shuesei's arm that he had crushed was indeed healed. It seemed that after consuming the goo poison, as long as one was not directly killed, the recovery ability was very strong. Gong Dai was suddenly a little worried. Fortunately, the treasure door had collapsed and no one else could enter this place. Gong Yimo did not chase after him. It was not wise to fight Shuesei head-on. They only wanted to force him away. As long as they got out and destroyed the exit, Shuesei would be trapped here and would not be able to escape even if he had wings. The exit must be nearby, or else Blind would not be able to control the movements in the cave so easily. Gong Yimo nodded. The two of them searched near the treasure, but after searching for a long time, they did not find anything. Gong Yimo could not help but look at Blind's corpse. She did not know if it was an illusion, but she felt that Blind was dirty and smelly when they first met, but now he did not seem so dirty. Gong Yimo's eyes lit up. "I know where it is." Chapter 578. Gong Yimo stood up and pulled Gong Dai to ask, "Where is the pool where you carried me to wash up?" His body is cleaner, most likely because he went into the water and was afraid that people would find out, so he used his internal energy to dry his clothes. "Do you think my guess is right?" Gong Dai couldn't help but kiss her. "Whatever you say is right." Gong Yimo was stunned and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Could he not always tease her with a pampering look? It made her heart itch every time. The two of them walked to the pool hand in hand. This pool was very special to them because it was where their first time happened. When they walked to the pool, Gong Yimo suddenly thought of that day, how she went crazy, how she tore Gong Dai's clothes, and how she dragged him to the pool for a day and a night. Her face unknowingly became hot and flustered. But Gong Dai's body was really strong and talented, cough cough. He was indeed the Grand Regent. Her mind was filled with wild thoughts, but her face was calm, as if she was seriously considering a way out. Gong Dai was a little nostalgic. Actually, he didn't want to leave this place so soon. He wanted to be alone with her for a while, just the two of them. It was just that the royal sister was in a hurry to send the medicine to Imperial Father so that they could have a proper relationship. Gong Dai sighed and suddenly stood in front of Gong Yimo, hugging her in his arms. What's wrong? Gong Yimo stuttered a little because the pool was behind Gong Dai, and the grass under their feet was still withered. Obviously, the fierce battle a few days ago had caused the grass to be tossed and turned, until now, it hadn't recovered. So when she stood on it, she only felt that her feet were burning. Nothing. Gong Dai's cold voice sounded in her ears, gentle with a trace of longing. I just want to hug you. Gong Yimo's body softened, and her heart warmed. She hugged him back obediently. It had to be said that the scenery here was pretty good. The pond water was clear and reflected the two of them leaning against each other. That kind of entanglement seemed inseparable. In the forbidden grounds with picturesque hills and limpid waters, hugging the person he loved and doing nothing else was a pleasant thing. But this was just Gong Yimo's thought. For a man who had been abstinent for a long time, even the cold-hearted regent was an insatiable wolf. Gong Yimo saw him hugging her tighter and tighter, and he had a reaction in such a short time. She couldn't help but sigh and worry about her future life. She wouldn't be bedridden every day in the future, right? Gong Yimo felt that it was necessary for her to interrupt him. At this moment, the emperor was still waiting for the snow Ganoderma in her hands. She could not delay any longer. So she said, stop fooling around. How about we talk outside? Gong Dai hugged her and rubbed against her. His cold voice sounded a little dissatisfied. Let's go out. There are a lot of wolves. Gong Emo rolled her eyes at the sky. Obviously, he was the biggest wolf here, okay? Pervert. But she still coaxed him good-naturedly. Nonsense. And even if there are wolves, I only like you. When Gong Dai heard her words, he raised his head and looked at her without blinking. His clear black and white eyes gave off a clean and clear feeling. He said seriously, you can only like me forever. After he said that softly, he suddenly frowned. If you like someone else, I'll tear that person into pieces. Gong Yimo laughed and deliberately teased him. Then why don't you tear me into pieces? Gong Dai looked at her for a long time. Finally, he let out a long sigh. I can't bear to. He grabbed her hand and placed it on his chest. When I think of hurting you, I'd rather kill myself first, silly. Gong Yimo smiled until her eyes turned into crescents. Why didn't she realize that Gong Dai had such a sweet mouth in the past? The words that came out of his mouth made her unable to stop herself. She wished that she could drown in his words of love. At this moment, a breeze blew past and lifted Gong Dai's hair. He was cold and beautiful, like a snow lotus in the sky that bloomed only for her. So she was naturally mesmerized by his beauty and obediently delivered her lips to his. The two of them kissed, but Gong Yimo pushed Gong Dai back. Gong Dai didn't notice and retreated all the way to the edge of the pool. Gong Yimo suddenly looked at him with a naughty smile and pushed him with both hands. You big pervert, go down and wake up. But even though she was fast, Gong Dai was faster. Gong Yimo pushed him, but he suddenly grabbed Gong Yimo's hand and pulled. With a splash, the two of them fell into the water. The clean water instantly drowned them. The coolness made Gong Yimo shiver slightly. Then, she was pulled into a fiery embrace and a passionate kiss landed on her lips again. Gong Yimo was dizzy from his kiss. He couldn't be thinking of having a feast in the water, right? Gong Yimo wanted to struggle, but Gong Dai held her tightly. Their black hair tangled together in the water. The sunlight shone through the water, making everything strange and beautiful. It was like a dream. She really couldn't coexist peacefully with this big pervert. Men who had been abstinent for a long time were really scary. Gong Yimo simply relaxed and enjoyed the kiss. Anyway, Gong Dai wouldn't let go of her until he was satisfied with the kiss, but she didn't stay idle. She looked around with her big eyes. This pool seemed to be just an ordinary pool. There wasn't any exit like she thought. Soon, her back touched the bottom of the pool. Luckily, she knew how to breathe. Otherwise, she wouldn't be able to do such a difficult move with Gong Dai. She hugged his neck and stared at him as if she was trying to convey a message. That's enough. Have you had enough? Gong Dai's eyes were half open. Apparently, he had caught the message. He deepened the kiss and pressed her to the bottom of the pool. It was as if he wanted to swallow her whole. Not enough. Far from enough. What I want is even more. In Gong Dai's blurred eyes, Gong Yimo felt that she could clearly see Gong Dai telling her that. Gong Yimo's face turned red. While she was struggling, she touched a rock. Who knew that when the rock moved, a dark water hole appeared behind her? The exit was really underwater. Gong Yimo was stunned. She parted their lips and stared at him, meaning, we've found the exit. Let's talk after we get out. Gong Dai was a little unwilling. He really wanted it. So he hugged Gong Yimo's waist slowly and blinked his big eyes. He actually started to act cute. He knew that royal sister couldn't stand it. Sure enough, Gong Yimo showed a pained expression. She was obviously hesitant. She was the kind of person who would try her best to satisfy the other party as long as the situation allowed her. Moreover, it was her lover. But she thought of something and couldn't help but gesture. After a long time, Gong Dai finally understood what Gong Yimo meant. She said, "It's uncomfortable to do it underwater." Gong Dai's face instantly darkened. How did royal sister know? But before he could ask, Gong Yimo had already dived into the black hole. Did she think that she had read those erotic novels for nothing? Chapter 579. The waterway is very long and narrow, only allowing one person to pass. Gong Yimo takes the lead, and Gong Dai follows closely behind. When they emerge from the water, they find themselves in a very close cellar-like space. After Gong Yimo goes ashore, she walks up the rough steps and looks at the wooden plank above her head. Suddenly, she has an idea. She reaches out and pushes, and the wooden plank opens. And the place where they are is actually right below the blind man's thatched hut. This blind man is so capable, he actually built a house directly above the safe passage of the treasure. Gong Yimo laments in her heart. If only she had discovered it last time. Then she wouldn't have to eat that nuisance. Gong Dai hugs her from behind and uses his internal force to dry her clothes. It's okay, we're out anyway. Gong Yimo can tell that Gong Dai is comforting her, so she shakes her head. Well, let's go back quickly. Father Emperor might be waiting anxiously. Gong Yimo originally thought very well. After she goes back, the Emperor's body will be treated, and then his life will be prolonged. Although the Crown Prince will be wronged, the Crown Prince's status is also above tens of thousands of people. It's already a very good situation that there is no war and disputes. However, the inner court of the imperial palace is filled with gloomy clouds. The emperor suddenly became seriously ill, and then vomited blood. Countless famous doctors came, but the diagnosis is the same as the imperial doctors, it's not obvious. This time, Gong Che is also a little worried. Every time after the court, he will come to see the emperor, but the emperor can't help but lose weight. Many people shook their head, saying that their talent is shallow. Gong Che has no choice but to find more famous doctors to treat the emperor. At this moment, Gong Che suddenly realized that he doesn't want the emperor to die. The smooth sailing in the imperial court made him finally understand the emperor's preference for him. Sometimes, when he seriously thinks about it, he has to say that between him and Gong Dai, the emperor is more partial to him. Before, he thought that if the emperor dies one day, he will be the emperor. But now that he thinks about it, he is quite ashamed. Gong Che lowers his head to feed the emperor the medicine. But the emperor gently separated it with one hand. Imperial father, you'll get better after taking the medicine. Gong Che advised in a low voice. Gong Ching smiled bitterly, his voice was very weak. You won't get better even if you eat it, cough cough. Father. Gong Che frowned and hurriedly put the bowl of medicine to one side and handed over a handkerchief. In order to reassure him, he said warmly, recently, everything in the imperial court has been well. Imperial father, please be at ease. Gong Ching didn't speak. His thick eyebrows were knitted together and his eyes were tightly shut. He seemed to be in great pain. Gong Che continued, now that the trade between the four countries has been opened, your son has also sent people to repair the national roads. Although the speed is a bit slow, it will be of great benefit in the future. Gong Ching finally spoke. I'm not worried about that. Gong Che was silent, while Gong Cheng's sunken eyes stared at him without blinking. The only one I'm worried about is you. Gong Che looked at him with dim eyes. He knew his father was going to start persuading him again. Che, ah. A country, only one person is not enough. Gong Dai, he is your best helper. He has outstanding ability, but he doesn't have the ambition to reach the top. The only conflict between the two of you is Mo. After speaking for so long, Gong Ching was a bit tired. He paused for a moment, and Gong Che eagerly defended Gong Yimo. Mo is innocent. He was afraid that the emperor would have the idea of hurting Mo again, so he quickly said, this son can handle all of this. Mo is a good child. Gong Ching closed his eyes and sighed. I also don't want to hurt her, but Che, since I was young, your imperial grandfather taught me that I am the crown prince, and in the future, I will be the son of heaven. And the son of heaven doesn't just mean glory, it's also a kind of responsibility. No matter what happens, I must put the world first. Do you understand? Gong Che was silent. Gong Cheng looked at him with a sneer. You don't understand. Gong Cheng half opened his eyes and looked at a place. If you understand, you won't make a scene like this. But father. Gong Che tightly grasped the emperor's hand. If you want this son to sacrifice for the world, this son will have no regrets. This son also has no other request. In this life, I only want Mo to accompany me. Is this too much? This is the only thing this son wants. Is this too much? Gong Ching didn't answer, but closed his eyes again. Obviously, he didn't want to talk. At this time, Changshi came in. Since the last time he was drugged by Gong Che, Changshi was very wary of him. He brought porridge, and at present, Gong Ching can only eat some liquid food. Someone quickly came in to report. Your Majesty, Your Highness. Princess and Prince are back. Gong Cheng's eyes moved, but he didn't open them. Gong Che was happy at first, but then he became silent. Last time, those words that Gong Yimo said to him by the soaring dragon river had touched him. He was very happy to see her, but he was afraid to see that she already had Gong Dai by her side. That would make him unable to control himself and do terrible things. But no matter how tangled he was, Gong Yimo also came in. Hearing that the emperor was seriously ill, she rushed into the palace, and Gong Dai sent him away. During this time, Gong Dai had accumulated a lot of things waiting for him to deal with. Gong Yimo was also afraid that Gong Dai and Gong Che would not get along with each other in front of the emperor. Wouldn't that worsen the emperor's condition? Gong Dai was worried about Gong Yimo's poison. Last time, Shuesei said that there was an antidote in the treasure, but there was no antidote at all. And Gong Yimo's poison could not be cured. After all, it was a hidden danger. Therefore, he couldn't care about other things. While dealing with the things in his hands, he sent people to find the antidote. When Gong Yimo came in, the smell of medicine made her frown. Then, she saw Gong Che. To be honest, the moment she saw Gong Che, she thought of Gong Che in his 30s. At that time, he was melancholy and dispirited, wandering around the Eastern Palace like a ghost, touching the chibi prints she left behind. So the main reason he betrayed her was because he was afraid of her. Because she was too strong, he was worried that she would change one day and overthrow him to become the empress. And Su Miaolan was gentle and clung to him, so she was not a threat to him. What a joke, it was actually because of such a reason. She couldn't say that she was completely right in this matter. If she hadn't been affected by the battlefield and had interacted with him more often, things wouldn't have turned out this way. But the past was the past, and now, he was her crown prince brother. Whatever he wanted in her previous life, she would give it to him in this life. When Gong Che saw that only Gong Yimo was there, he was very happy. He greedily drew Gong Yimo's face. She became more and more beautiful, and as long as she appeared, she would be the focus of the crowd. Chapter 580. Seeing her walking towards him, Gong Che suddenly felt that if Imo agreed to be with him, he would be satisfied even if he could only live to 30 years old. No, it would be good to be with her for even one day. As long as he had a chance, she would definitely find that he was so gentle and suitable for her. He was 100 times more suitable than Gong Dai. Imo, you're back. He didn't know what he wanted, he just wanted to talk to her and be closer to her. So he went forward and asked softly, "Did you find the snow Ganoderma?" Gong Yimo nodded. Gong Che's gaze was too scorching, she couldn't accept it, so she said awkwardly, "Summon the imperial physician, let's take a look at imperial father first." Gong Che nodded and hurriedly ordered someone to summon the imperial physician. Gong Yimo had already walked to the side of the dragon bed, looking at the weak emperor, she smiled slightly. "Imperial father, I found the snow Ganoderma, you will get better soon." Although there was only a 50% chance of a complete recovery after finding the snow Ganoderma, Gong Cheng was a man with strong willpower, he would definitely survive. Gong Yimo firmly believed. Gong Cheng looked at her with some affection. Even though this daughter of his gave him a headache, when he saw her, he was only left with love and helplessness. "Are you okay? Are you injured?" Although he didn't know the specific situation of the Snow Clan's treasure, Shuel Yen occasionally mentioned it with deep fear. Moreover, she said that the treasure was Mo's treasure. He didn't know if her trip was smooth, what danger she encountered, and what she gained. Gong Yimo thought of the goo poison in her body, but on the way back from one city, there were no signs of it acting up. However, Gong Dai said that Shuewushi would act up once every few days. Gong Yimo secretly thought that all of this might be because her biological mother had taken stone powder since she was young, so her body also developed some resistance. But if the emperor asked, she would definitely say it was fine. She shook her head vigorously. "It's just a lousy treasure from a small country. There's not a single coin in it." I was so disappointed. Gong Cheng was amused by her. he didn't doubt Gong Yimo's words. He thought, what good things could be left behind in Snow Country? Shulian was a woman after all, so she was a bit alarmist. At this time, the imperial physician came. Gong Yimo gave the snow Ganoderma to the imperial physician for them to study. They all knew that the emperor's relapse was caused by the poisoning that happened more than 10 years ago. With the snow Ganoderma, they were at least 50% confident. Rest assured, Your Highness. Your humble servant and the others will prepare the medicine immediately. Gong Yimo nodded. Thank you. Then, he asked them to leave. There was no time to lose. The sooner Gong Qing took the medicine, the better. Gong Yimo and Gong Qing chatted for a while. It wasn't until Gong Qing fell asleep that Gong Yimo realized that Gong Che was still there. Gong Yimo couldn't help but think of the last time. It was also in Zhaoyang Hall. Gong Che almost did that to her, she couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed. Gong Che had been waiting for a long time for an opportunity to talk to her. He glanced at the emperor. Let's go out for a walk. Gong Yimo nodded. Now that she was one of Gong Dai's people, Gong Che should give up, right? Thinking of his end in the last life, Gong Yimo couldn't help but feel a little soft-hearted. She sincerely hoped that he could live well in this life and find a good match that truly belonged to him. She and he were not suitable. Didn't the last life prove it? The autumn air was crisp and the weather was good for the past few days. The two of them walked on the palace road. Looking at the exquisite and grand pavilions around them, Gong Yimo's heart gradually calmed down. Just as she was about to speak, Gong Che spoke first. Gong Yimo glanced at him. With the warm breeze, her fine black hair fluttered slightly, as if she was a fairy in the wind. With just one glance, Gong Che felt that he had fallen deeper. The gaze he looked at her with became gentler. He slowly opened his mouth. If you're willing, I don't mind sharing you with Gong Dai. Gong Yimo didn't understand at first, but when she did, she felt terrible. What did you say? Gong Yimo widened her eyes, but she didn't know how cute her lively appearance was. It made Gong Che's unwillingness disappear in an instant. You're the princess of Dai Yu State. Even if you're not my father's biological child, as long as my father acknowledges you, you're my younger sister, Gong Dai's older sister. Gong Che said helplessly. Then, he became nervous. He stood there with a sense of hesitation. But as long as you're willing, I'm willing to coexist peacefully with Gong Dai. God knows how much effort it took him to say that he wanted to coexist peacefully with Gong Dai. But if he could get her like this, even if he could only have half of her, he would be satisfied. Gong Che even had a wild hope. Perhaps as long as became his woman, she would realize that he was actually much better than Gong Dai. Gong Yimo couldn't help but reach out to touch his forehead. You don't have a fever, why are you talking nonsense? Gong Che's face was slightly red. Gong Yimo's approach made him feel slightly embarrassed. His starry eyes were as gentle as water as he anxiously waited for Gong Yimo's reply. Gong Yimo sighed. Crown Prince Gij, are you serious? This doesn't sound like something you would say. Unexpectedly, Gong Che nodded repeatedly. I'm serious. Gong Yimo was stunned. He took the opportunity to hold Gong Yimo's hand tightly in his own. Gong Yimo's hand was soft. The moment he held her hand, he smiled like a young man who had just experienced his first awakening of love. However, it was indeed his first awakening of love. All his love was for Gong Yimo alone. As long as I can have you, even if it's just for a day. I will have no regrets in this life. It was obviously sad words, but he said it so sweetly. In a daze, Gong Yimo suddenly recalled the last few sentences that Gong Che asked her in her previous life. Can you give me another chance in the next life? I will definitely not be like this again. It was really an ill-fated relationship. Gong Yimo should have been stimulated by this absurd thought. However, Gong Che's innocence and the infatuation in his eyes made her feel a deep sense of helplessness. Crown Prince Gage, have you thought about the consequences? Gong Yimo lowered her voice, trying not to hurt him. If I promise you, you will still have to marry in the future. You will have an empress and concubines. Even if you are willing to share me with others, I will not share my man with others. She slowly pulled her hand out. Even if you say that you only want me, will the ministers agree? Will Imperial Father agree? Will your mother agree? That's simply impossible. Chapter 581. Gong Che stared blankly for a moment before feeling a bit of bitterness. He was already willing to lower himself to this point for Immerse, so why did Immerse still want to force him like this? Could it be that he couldn't even marry a few women and bring them back as decorations? She really was ruthless. The sun hung high in the sky. At this moment, Gong Che no longer felt warm, but rather cold. He thought bitterly, just how far did he have to go before he could have her? Or just how far did he have to go before he could have her without hurting her? He was really in pain. Really in pain. Gong Yimo sighed. Crown Prince Gage, think about it carefully. This place is not far from Taiji Palace, so I can go back by myself. After saying this, she prepared to leave first. However, Gong Che suddenly pulled her back. Her sleeves were pulled back, and the tender charm on her fair arm was gone. Gong Che's pupils shrank. The gentleness in his body instantly disappeared, and he became terrifying. Gong Dai. He had already succeeded. The resentment and jealousy from not getting what he wanted instantly exploded. He grabbed Gong Yimo's hand and asked in a pained voice, "This is the reason why you rejected me, right? You had an affair with Gong Dai. Did you already decide to run away?" Gong Yimo was startled. She quickly pulled back her hand, and her cheeks flushed red. "You're impudent." Gong Che suddenly sneered. The warm and innocent Crown Prince Gage from before had already disappeared. In its place was a cold and terrifying man filled with hostility. "I'm impudent." His eyes were like cold stars as he slowly approached Gong Yimo. "If I was impudent, I would have taken you back in Star City. I would have made you my woman. And not Gong Dai." Gong Yimo heard him talk about the past, but she did not know how to refute him. Gong Che continued. "From the first time you kissed me, I fell in love with you. I clearly did it earlier than Gong Dai. Why didn't you give me a chance?" He stared at Gong Yimo tightly. His eyes were bloodshot, filled with unwillingness to die without understanding what had happened. "I'm even willing to share you with Gong Dai. My posture is so low that you can trample on me. What do you want me to do for you to agree? You want me to die in front of you?" Gong Che. Gong Yimo was a little flustered by his words. She closed her eyes with a headache. A woman can't have two husbands. Since I've chosen Gong Dai, I won't change my mind. Then why didn't you choose me? Gong Che roared. Fortunately, there was no one around. Otherwise, it would be hard to explain. You really want to know? Gong Yimo's eyes suddenly turned cold as she glanced at him. Gong Che's heart skipped a beat. Gong Yimo had never looked at him like that before. He wanted to say something, but Gong Yimo's eyes were gradually turning red, and her murderous aura was gradually increasing. It actually made it difficult for him to breathe. At that moment, Gong Yimo really wanted to tell him. She really wanted to tell him. "Because you let me down in my previous life. You ruthlessly let me down. I gave you the best of everything in the world. But you betrayed me for something that didn't exist. Anger surged in her heart. Gong Yimo was suddenly startled. What was wrong with her? Why did she suddenly have the urge to break Gong Che's neck? Gong Yimo felt a chill run down her spine. Could it be that her goo poison was about to flare up? She no longer cared about Gong Che. She turned around and quickly ran back to Taiji Palace. On the way back, Gong Dai said that he had already sent people to find the antidote. He was still experimenting on Xue Wuxi. He didn't know when he would get the antidote, but she had to control it. If it flared up in the palace, the consequences would be unimaginable. Gong Yimo secretly made up her mind. After the emperor took the medicine, she would move out. It would be better for her to live at Gong Dai's place. It would be safer for him to watch over her. More than 10 days passed. Gong Dai was somewhat mysterious. He was often elusive. Gong Yimo was also relieved because her goo poison didn't flare up. The imperial physician also sent good news. The medicine that the emperor needed had been concocted. A bowl of pitch-black medicine was placed in front of Gong Qing. The imperial physician said that there was only a 50% chance of success. At first, she didn't feel it. But when the bowl of medicine was held in her hand, Gong Yimo became nervous. She felt that the bowl in her hand seemed to weigh 1,000 catties. On the contrary, Gong Qing smiled and comforted her. It's fine. Whether it's life or death, Zhen is already prepared. Gong Yimo glared at him. What life or death? Imperial father is really talking nonsense. She glanced at the medicine bowl in her hand again. The results of this medicine will only be seen after 3 days. In these 3 days, your body will be a little uncomfortable. You have to bear with it. This medicine wasn't a special medicine. It had to be taken for 3 days. During these 3 days, Gong Cheng's body would become a battlefield. If he won, with Gong Cheng's age, it wouldn't be a problem to live for another 20 years. If he failed, Gong Yimo suddenly didn't dare to think about it. Seeing her in a daze and hesitating, Gong Qing directly reached out his big hand to take the bowl in her hand and gulped it down. Gong Yimo stared blankly. Looking at his thin and weak body, she couldn't bear it. Gong Qing could only eat liquid food. Moreover, he couldn't eat any meat dishes with oil. Even a little oil would give him a splitting headache, so he was very thin. His once tall and sturdy figure now looked particularly distressing. However, his action of drinking the medicine was still so free and easy. It was as if what he ate wasn't something that would determine his life or death, but some other medicine that was dispensable. Seeing Gong Yimo's gloomy expression, Gong Qing smiled and patted her head. Silly girl, don't you think that your imperial father is so easy to defeat? He was much more energetic these days, perhaps because there was a turning point and hope. But at this moment, because there was no fat on his face, it made his face fold up and pile up on both sides. If he was in good health, this smile would definitely be as warm as the morning sun. But now, Gong Yimo only saw heartache. Her eyes instantly reddened. Gently holding his hand, she asked, "Will it get better?" Gong Qing nodded affirmatively. "We haven't seen you get married, haven't seen you give birth, how can we die?" He revealed his white and neat teeth. Thinking of what Gong Dai said when he came to see him, he couldn't help but sigh. Unknowingly, you're also a big girl. When you give birth, the boy will be a prince. A daughter will be a princess. A monarch's words are no joke. Gong Yimo's heart was sour, but she was still amused by him. She said with a sour and serious tone, "A monarch's words are no joke." Gong Qing nodded. "Believe in us, okay?" Only then did Gong Yimo nod. Then, as if the medicine began to take effect, Gong Qing gradually fell asleep. The next 3 days could be said to be the decisive 3 days. Gong Yimo was on tenterhooks every day. The originally nervous imperial physician was a little embarrassed. "Princess, don't worry. Although the remaining poison is fierce, His Majesty's body was strong and healthy before. He laid down a good foundation, so he won't collapse so easily. These few days, take the medicine on time, don't be agitated, and recuperate for 3 days. Soon, Princess will see His Majesty who is full of energy again." Chapter 582. Gong Yimo thought about it and agreed. She knew about Gong Cheng's body. He fought in the battlefield in his early years and did not stop exercising after settling down. So his body was still very strong. In addition, Gong Cheng's character had always been firm and courageous. He had been the emperor for many years. That kind of strength had long been ingrained in his bones. He would not be defeated so easily. Thinking of this, she felt a little relieved and went back to rest. Gong Dai had entered the palace several times during this period. Now that he saw that the emperor had finally taken the antidote, he also breathed a sigh of relief. No matter what, if the emperor presided over the wedding between him and the royal sister would be very happy. So he sincerely hoped that the emperor would get better. Moreover, his confidence in the emperor was far stronger than Gong Yimo's. Someone as strong as Gong Qing was like a giant in his heart when he was a child. When he got through this, there would be double happiness and it would add color to the wedding. As for Gong Che, he did not consider it. Anyway, things had already come to this point. He had to recognize Gong Che even if he did not want to, because the royal sister was already his woman. Moreover, he finally got the emperor's approval. That day, Gong Dai went to see the emperor. He did not know what Gong Dai promised in front of the emperor, but in the end, the emperor finally approved his marriage with Gong Yimo. He also said that when he recovered, he would personally preside over the wedding. In fact, it was just to prevent Gong Che from causing trouble. It was really difficult to be a father to this extent. Both sides were flesh and blood. He could only make the choice he thought was the best. But on this side, Gong Che's side was in deep trouble. Mo had been taken by Gong Dai. Even if he had not tried it, he knew that once a woman was taken by someone, she would be even more infatuated. But what about him? What should he do? This kind of unwillingness, anger, and grievance could be endured at first. But when his people found out that the emperor had agreed to the news of Prince Qi marrying the princess and was even willing to preside over the wedding, that kind of resentment, it almost swallowed him up. He was the crown prince. Did he not deserve the best of everything? Could it be that he was biased just because Gong Dai found the snow Ganoderma for him? What wedding ceremony? He was clearly afraid that he would ruin the wedding. Everyone was on guard against him. It was as if he was an evil person who broke up people's marriages. None of the people around him supported him. If they had supported him from the beginning. Or perhaps, he should have told him about Amour's background from the very beginning. Why was he so passive? Why did it have to be like this? But the reality was that he was obstructed at every turn. Everyone was trying to stop him from being together with Amour, but not a single person tried to stop Gong Dai. Why? Gong Dai punched the wall. He had clearly grown up with Amour. His love for her was definitely no less than Gong Dai's. Why didn't Amour give him a chance? Why? He clearly only needed a little bit of warmth. He only needed a little bit. He only wanted to see her every day. His heart ached from missing her. For a whole 6 years, he couldn't get her. He had never gotten her. Never. Falling into madness, he gradually became demonic. After throwing a tantrum, he became strangely quiet. If he couldn't ask for it, he could only snatch it, right? Gong Yimo suffered for 3 days in anxiety. Her efforts were all worth it. 3 days later, Emperor Gong woke up. The imperial physician quickly went over to check his pulse, and then said in surprise, "The remaining poison has been cleared. Your Majesty's recovery is just around the corner." After saying that, he took the lead to kneel down and shouted excitedly, "Your Majesty's flood of good fortune fills the sky, long live, long live, long live." The others quickly followed suit and shouted, "Your Majesty's flood of good fortune fills the sky, the dragon's grace lasts forever." Emperor Gong was overjoyed. Although his body had not fully recovered, hearing such news, his spirit was aroused. "Very good, you will be rewarded, all of you will be rewarded. Thank you, Your Majesty." At this time, Gong Yimo came back to her senses. She happily ran over and acted like a spoiled child. "There's still me. Your Majesty, I'm a meritorious subject, right? How are you going to reward me?" Emperor Gong looked at her in amusement. Your status is high now, I have nothing to reward you with. I'll just reward you with the ideal husband that you've been longing for." Gong Yimo understood immediately. Gong Dai had already told her that the emperor was willing to preside over their marriage. At that moment, she felt a little embarrassed. But she was also a thick-skinned person. "That won't do, having the ideal husband is not enough, also needs a dowry. A lot of dowry." Emperor Gong was grinning from ear to ear. "All right. I'll do as you say." Gong Yimo was satisfied, and then helped the emperor up to eat. In the evening, a big palace banquet was held for everyone to attend. First, it was to announce the good news of the emperor's recovery to the world. Second, it was to announce Gong Yimo's marriage to the world. Gong Yimo didn't agree. She knew from the imperial physician that Emperor Gong had just woken up. At this time, he must rest and wait for his body to stabilize. But Emperor Gong insisted on holding the palace banquet. Gong Yimo couldn't persuade him, so she could only agree. During lunch, only the emperor, the empress, her, and the crown prince ate together. The emperor was fine. After eating a few mouthfuls, he was tired and went to rest. The empress also said that she was tired and quickly left. At this time, the more she looked at Gong Yimo, the more uncomfortable she felt. She was like a hot potato that couldn't be handled at all. She could only escape. Therefore, only Gong Yimo and Gong Che were left at the banquet. Gong Yimo suddenly felt awkward. She hurriedly ate a few mouthfuls, put down the bowl, and prepared to leave. Who knew that Gong Che suddenly pulled her? His fingers were very cold. When they touched her, she felt a chill all over her body and was a little flustered. "What's wrong, brother Crown Prince?" She still wanted to whitewash it. After all, this was Xiaoyang Hall. The emperor just went to rest. Gong Che, on the other hand, was very calm. He looked at her, and his jade-like face slowly revealed a trace of a smile. That seemingly gentle smile made Gong Emo even more frightened. I thought about it. I think what you said makes sense." He squeezed Gong Yimo's hand tightly, so I decided to let go. "As long as you promise me one thing." Gong Yimo had a bad premonition in her heart, but she still couldn't help but raise her eyebrows and ask. "What is it?" Gong Ju suddenly got up and whispered to her with an evil smile that was completely different from his gentle appearance. "I want you to accompany me once." Gong Yimo was stunned. She only felt a pain in her hand that was being squeezed. She lost consciousness and softly fell into Gong Che's arms. Gong Che lovingly stroked her long hair and said softly, Okay, Emor, I'll take you back. He had already gone crazy and didn't care about the consequences at all. Eastern Palace. Gong Yimo was lying on the crown prince's large bed. Her brows were slightly knitted and her black hair was scattered, giving her a different kind of enchanting charm. Gong Che was half lying by her side, waiting for her to wake up. Yes, he wanted to take her body while she was awake and let her know who the person possessing her was. This way, he would also be her man. Why couldn't he fight with Gong Dai? While waiting, he couldn't help hugging her and kissing her. Those red lips were like an antidote to him. He couldn't get enough. Moreover, he kissed her very hard. It was like the end of the world was coming. It was overbearing, as if he wanted to erase the taste that belonged to someone else. Her amour, how good would it be if she only belonged to him? Chapter 583. Under such torment, Gong Yimo woke up very quickly. She blinked and was a little confused about where she was. But it was useless even if she woke up. Her whole body was hot and weak. It was obvious that Gong Che had fed her a strong aphrodisiac, making her unable to resist at all. Gong Yimo felt as if there was a fire burning in her chest. She was very afraid that the aphrodisiac that had suddenly entered her body would activate the goo poison. Then Gong Che. Would he die in her hands? Gong Che. She gasped with difficulty. You. Let go of me. Gong Che did not know what he was doing. He did not know that there was a time bomb in her body. But under the aphrodisiac, her whole body was sore and weak. Even speaking was difficult. How could she explain this matter? Gong Che realized that Gong Yimo had woken up and was a little happy. He was lying next to her in a white undershirt. His black hair was scattered, just like in her previous life. After they got married, every morning, he was handsome and lazy. But in her previous life, when she saw him like this, she would pounce on him and act coquettishly. But now, she only hoped that Gong Che would stay away from her. If she really killed him by accident, Daiyu's state would be in chaos. But Gong Che was not aware of this. He inched closer and continued to hug Gong Yimo's soft body. His lips pressed against hers, licking and twisting. Their breathing became rapid. Gong Yimo felt her heart beating faster and faster. But the scary thing was that she did not know if this was because of the aphrodisiac or because the goo poison was slowly activating. She was very scared, so her mind was very clear. But her body was very hot, as if she wanted more. Feeling her rapid breathing, Gong Che became even more excited. He reluctantly let go of her lips. Amour. He smiled foolishly. His handsome face was slightly red, but there was an infinite charm in his sweetness, as if he had also taken an aphrodisiac. You're so sweet, Gong Yimo heard his words and felt a chill in her heart. Quick, let me leave. Gong Che was a bit displeased. She blinked her beautiful eyes and complained, let you go and find Gong Dai. He sneered. Gong Dai should be preparing for his wedding right now, right? By the time he knows that I've taken you away and barges in, you'll already be mine. Gong Yimo naturally knew what Gong Dai was doing, and in order to reduce the conflict, she begged Gong Dai not to enter the palace, and just focus on preparing for the wedding. She did not expect Gong Che to be so bold. Did he know what he was doing? Let go, Gong Yimo was panting, but her current appearance was damned seductive. Her cheeks were pink and her eyes were moist. Because she was panting, her red lips were slightly parted, causing Gong Che's gaze to become even deeper. He wanted nothing more than to tie her to the bed and enjoy her every day so that her beauty would only bloom for him. His fair fingers unbuttoned his clothes bit by bit. How can I do that? Amour. I can't let go of you. Are you feeling very uncomfortable? I'll give it to you, alright. He was as gentle as water. As he kissed her delicate lips, he wanted nothing more than to drown in her sweetness. Feeling that her body was getting hotter and hotter, Gong Che thought that it was the effect of the aphrodisiac, so he lowered his eyes and said softly. You've been poisoned. Are you very thirsty? Very empty? Let Brother Crown Prince help you detoxify the poison, alright? As he spoke, he had already taken off his shirt. Pressing down on Gong Yimou's body, he began to take off her clothes. Gong Yimou felt a tyrannical aura rising in her body. She had a premonition that something bad was going to happen. What should she do? The goo poison in her body seemed to have been activated. She had no choice but to think quickly. Suddenly, she wrapped her arms around Gong Che's neck and delivered her lips to his. This was the first time she had taken the initiative, and Gong Che's heart almost melted. He stopped what he was doing and passionately kissed her back. The strength that he used to suppress her gradually decreased, and he only knew how to respond to her excitedly. Satisfy her. He wanted her, he longed for her body. His heart ached from thinking about it. And today, he could finally fulfill this wish. It had been 6 years. Every night in his dreams, she was the only one he longed for. Now that he finally had pleasure under her body, even if it was because of the aphrodisiac, he still felt indescribable happiness, as if he was in heaven. It didn't matter if those people stopped him or didn't help him. If he wanted it, he would take it himself. He would use any means to get it. Gong Yimou's body was indeed thirsting for it, but her mind was even clearer. She knew what the consequences would be if the goo poison were to activate in the palace, so her body was tense. She wanted to solve this situation. After feeling Gong Che gradually soften, she hugged him and flipped over, pressing down on his body. Gong Che was originally startled, thinking that Gong Yimou wanted to run away, so he tightly grabbed her hand. But Gong Yimou continued to kiss him, as if she was completely immersed in lust. Gong Che gradually relaxed, feeling Gong Yimou licking his Adam's apple. His entire body was numb, and his brain was occupied by an indescribable feeling. He couldn't help but let out a seductive moan. Mor, his hand pressed Gong Yimou's head, pulling her closer to him. His 10 fingers tangled with her hair. At this moment, he couldn't think of anything else, he was completely consumed by lust. He only hoped that Gong Yimou could quickly take him, fiercely. He couldn't hold it in any longer. Let me, be your man, be with you. For you, I can give up anything, I can give up anything. As he spoke, a look of longing and shyness appeared on his face. He had waited for this day for far too many years. The hopelessness, anger, and unwillingness made him do such a reckless thing. However, he did not regret it, not at all. As long as he could have her, even if he had to die for a day, he would not have any regrets, but what he didn't realize was that Gong Yimou's eyes were getting redder and redder. She was like a trapped beast, where was the desire in her eyes? There was only forbearance. That kind of forbearance where she clearly wanted to bite his neck, but because of her rationality, she only kissed him and wanted him to relax. But she couldn't control it anymore. Finally, the poison in her body finally gained some strength, so she suddenly jumped up from Gong Che's body and rushed out like the wind. Gong Che was stunned. It was too late to catch her, but at the door, he had arranged layers of guards, Gong Yimou couldn't escape. As expected, when Gong Yimou opened the door, a cold halberd stopped her. Her eyes were red, and she turned around to look at Gong Che, saying word by word. Let me go. Gong Che then realized that her condition wasn't right. What was going on? Why did he feel that Immerse was in pain? It was as if she was enduring something, and it was very painful. Could it be the side effect of the aphrodisiac? Gong Yimo only felt that everything in front of her was slowly turning red. I beg you. Let me go. Gong Che saw that her eyes were red, and he finally knew what the problem was. His heart was filled with worry, and her pain made him regain his rationality. Mor, don't be afraid. I'll call the imperial physician, don't be afraid. But it was too late. Chapter 586. The Imperial Guards received the order and they realized that Gong Yimo was incomparably fierce. They would die if they got close to her. So they chose to use their spears to stab her. Sure enough, Gong Yimo was annoyed and was a little angry. But the angrier she was, the more merciless her attacks were. Soon, Gong Yimo had many wounds on her body. Although they were very shallow, it was the most annoying. Ah, she roared like an enraged beast. Everyone could feel the bone-chilling murderous intent. And Changshi was horrified to discover that with this roar, Gong Yimo seemed to have become stronger. Her inner strength was rising steadily. It was as if she was just playing with them before, and now that she had enough fun, she started to get serious. Everyone was shocked by the sudden burst of dangerous aura from her body. They felt a chill down their spine. But in order to protect the Emperor, they decided to take the initiative and rushed over together. No! Changshi shouted, but it was too late. He almost did not see how Gong Yimo moved, and those weapons were all in her hands. Then, they fell to the ground. Everyone looked at their empty hands. Some of the smarter ones subconsciously ran away, but the one or two who ran too slow had their chests pierced by Gong Yimo's hand. They died instantly. Emperor Qing was frightened by the terrifying scene in front of him. His face was heavy and his heart was trembling. He endured the pain and finally gave the order to kill. Summon all the Imperial Guards to stand by. Go quickly. The palace servant received the order and quickly passed it down. Soon, all the Imperial Guards were gathered here. If 100 or 200 people were not enough, then 10 or 20,000. If he really wanted to kill Gong Yimo, it was not impossible. But Emperor Qing was still hesitant. He had not figured out Gong Yimo's situation. Did he really have to kill her? But when he saw Gong Yimo kill another 100 people, he could no longer take any chances. The monster in front of him was not his daughter. What was going on? He no longer had the strength and time to investigate. The only thing he could do was to stop her before she massacred the imperial palace. Or kill her right here and now. Gong Yimo was surrounded by countless people, and the aura of so many people made her even more irritated. The desire to kill grew stronger and stronger. She also realized that the person who called so many people seemed to be the one sitting in the palanquin, so she made a prompt decision and directly attacked Gong Qing. Naturally, Gong Qing also noticed this and ordered the archers to be on standby. He wanted to kill this beast with arrows. The archers were on standby. The rain of arrows immediately slowed down Gong Yimo's attack speed. At the same time, she blocked the sharp arrows coming from all directions. At the same time, he slowly moved in the direction of the Emperor. But it was too slow. She became more and more irritated. She hated the person who gave the order to kill her, Gong Qing. Suddenly, she stopped blocking the arrows that were about to land on her body. She rushed forward at an extremely fast speed. Her reckless attacks and murderous aura allowed her to break through the encirclement of the Imperial Guards and create a gap. She kept moving in the direction of Gong Qing. She didn't care about the 2 arrows on her body, as if she couldn't feel the pain. In the process of moving, someone came to stop her. She was also ruthless. She directly pulled out the arrow on her body and stabbed the other party, killing him instantly. As soon as the arrow was pulled out, blood naturally flowed out. But Gong Yimo didn't care. She only stared at Gong Qing, as if she could only see him. Gong Qing looked at her ruthless action and his scalp went numb for a moment. But before he could give the order, Gong Yimo had already rushed to the front of the dragon palanquin in the next second. Fast, she was really too fast. The palace people who were carrying the palanquin subconsciously retreated. They were so scared that their legs went soft, but at this moment, they didn't directly let go. But in Gong Yimo's eyes, their retreating speed was so slow that it was no different from crawling. She jumped and suddenly pulled out the second arrow on her body. The blood-stained arrowhead was like a flying knife waiting to be shot, glowing with a bloody cold light. At such a close distance, she could hit the emperor with one shot. At this time, the emperor's body was weak. If he received this arrow, there was absolutely no way for him to survive. Gong Yimo swung her hand, and the flying feather flew towards Gong Qing like a stream of light. Gong Cheng's eyes widened, but it was as if he was locked on one side. He couldn't even dodge. He never thought that there would be a day when Emo would point her sword at him. Even more so, he never thought that he, Gong Qing, would not die on the battlefield, nor would he die of poisoning. Instead, he would die in the hands of his own daughter. But at the last moment, Changshi fiercely pounced and blocked the arrow with his body. His chest suddenly exploded with a flower of blood, and his white hair was instantly blown away by the strong wind. Finally, he gradually wilted, his horsetail whisk finally fell to the ground, and he knelt down, blood flowing out of his mouth. This time, there was absolutely no possibility of him surviving. Changshi. Gong Cheng's heart was in severe pain, and his eyes were about to burst. In the next second, he watched as Gong Yimo stepped forward. Under Changshi's almost pleading eyes, she reached out and ruthlessly pulled out the arrow. Blood splattered 3 feet, and Changshi's eyes instantly lost focus, and he fell to the ground with a loud bang. She had completely cut off Changshi's life. When Gong Qing saw this, he finally couldn't hold back and spat out a mouthful of blood. When he spat out this mouthful of blood, his entire person wilted. His head gradually hurt. Even if he didn't want to admit it, Gong Qing sadly discovered that the remaining poison in his body seemed to have started to backfire. His body was unstable now, and he couldn't be stimulated. But Gong Che was seriously injured, and Changshi died tragically. Under the continuous stimulation, he couldn't help but spit out the blood in his heart. When he spat out this mouthful of blood, the remaining poison in his body that hadn't completely disappeared immediately backfired. He was afraid that he didn't have long to live. Thinking of this, he raised his head and looked at Gong Yimo. Even if he were to die, he would drag Gong Yimo down with him. If she went crazy and couldn't be controlled, then he would use his death to protect the Daiyu State's palace. Kill her. When Gong Yimo was killing Changshi, the imperial guards once again surrounded Gong Yimo. Her hair was flying, and her body was covered in blood. She held a bloody arrow in her hand, and it was obvious that she didn't know what fear was. This time, Gong Qing didn't show any mercy, and the imperial guards didn't show any mercy either. Under the barrage of arrows, no matter how powerful Gong Yimo was, it was inevitable that she would be injured. She originally wanted to attack the emperor again, but suddenly, her knee was shot, and she couldn't help but kneel on the ground. This was the opportunity. The imperial guards once again raised their bows, and a dense rain of arrows rained down. This time, Gong Yimo would definitely die. Stop. A cold and stern voice sounded, but the end of the voice was slightly trembling. Gong Dai looked at Gong Yimo, who was surrounded by layers of people. At that moment, his heart ached so much that it felt like it was about to split open. He rushed in without a care. Because of his sudden appearance, he directly opened up a gap in the Imperial Guards. However, Gong Yimo didn't distinguish between friend and foe. When she saw someone approaching her, she didn't think twice and attacked Gong Dai. Chapter 587. However, one of her legs was injured, which greatly restricted her movements. When Gong Dai saw that she was covered in blood and her eyes were red, his eyes also turned red. Royal sister. It's me. Gong Dai held the stone heart in his hand, trying to awaken Gong Yimo's memory. However, although she seemed to have some consciousness this time, it was far crazier than the last time. Therefore, she did not recognize Gong Dai at all and killed him without hesitation. When Gong Qing saw that Gong Dai had come, he wanted to stop him, but because of the blood he spat out, his body was injured and he was powerless. He was really afraid that in just a few hours, things had become so out of control. It was obviously a good day. In an instant, it turned the world upside down. He could have lived, but now, only death was left. However, it did not matter if he died. He could not let his 2 sons and the future of Dai Yu State fall in the hands of Gong Yimo. Royal sister. Wake up. Gong Dai called out to her as he fought. However, he could not see the use of it. Although Gong Yimo's attack speed had slowed down, he did not know if it was because of the arrow in her right knee or because of other reasons. Gong Dai lamented in his heart and was even more furious. Gong Che was really good. Originally, he was still on guard against Gong Che, but Royal Sister repeatedly promised that she would only like him. Moreover, now that the Emperor's life was at stake, she believed that the Crown Prince would not do anything out of line, so he was slightly relieved. While nervously preparing for the wedding, he anxiously looked around for medicine. The funny thing was that they all thought that in the Emperor's situation, Gong Che, as the Crown Prince, would not do anything drastic. However, Gong Che did it. And he did it without caring about the consequences. He was really powerful. He actually drugged Royal Sister. He even wanted to use force to get her. Gong Dai regretted it in his heart. This was also his fault. He clearly knew that the Royal Sister had been poisoned and was in danger of exploding at any time. He should have stayed by her side at all times. This was all his fault. However, Gong Dai couldn't be blamed. Gong Dai had many responsibilities on his shoulders, and the things that had been piling up for a long time had already made him crazy with work. He even asked for medicine and a doctor. Moreover, the reason why he was so eager to prepare for the wedding was because he wanted to get Gong Yimo. More importantly, he wanted to marry her and be with her openly. He wanted to keep an eye on her. Once they were married, he would be able to watch over her every day. He just didn't expect that such a thing would happen at such a time. Man proposes, God disposes. How should today's matter be resolved? Gong Yimo wasn't in her right mind, so she naturally didn't know how to end things. However, Gong Dai knew her very well. He knew that if the Royal Sister woke up and found out that she had killed so many people, including Changxi, she would be dead. She wouldn't be able to accept it. Wake up, Gong Dai couldn't do anything to her. Moreover, he didn't attack Gong Yimo at all. He only focused on defense. Under such circumstances, how could he be Gong Yimo's opponent? Finally, Gong Yimo grabbed Gong Dai's neck with one hand. Her eyes were fierce. At the critical moment of life and death, everyone's nerves were stretched taut. Especially Gong Qing, who almost vomited blood again. Gong Dai was responsible for Zhao Prison, the bank, and many other responsibilities. If Gong Dai died and Gong Che was seriously injured and unconscious, the Yu state would be turned upside down. Gong Yimo! Stop it! Gong Qing roared angrily. He reached out as if he wanted to pounce on Gong Yimo. However, it was useless. After vomiting blood, his entire body was sore and he couldn't move, let alone stop Gong Yimo. Gong Yimo's fingers gradually tightened, but Gong Dai strangely realized that he could still speak and breathe. He took out the stone heart with some effort. Shui Sei's guess was wrong. The stone heart couldn't control Gong Yimo at all. However, he hoped that Gong Yimo would remember who he was when she saw the stone heart. However, Gong Yimo didn't move at all. At that moment, her breathing quickened and her chest rose and fell violently. However, she seemed to be in a trance. Everyone was surprised. Gong Yimo's body was filled with murderous intent. Her eyes were still red and her black hair was moving without wind. However, she didn't take any further action. Gong Dai was in her hands. As long as she exerted a little more force, this person would die in her hands just like the previous people. Royal sister, Gong Dai called out to her softly. Gong Yimo seemed to be stimulated as she exerted force in her hands. However, she endured it in the next second. It was as if something was twitching in her head. Her head hurt so much that it felt like it was going to split open. Kill him. Kill this person. Kill all of them. Gong Yimo didn't move and no one dared to move. Gong Qing grabbed the soft cushion tightly and held his breath. After a while, he said. Gong Yimo. He's Gong Dai. He's your husband. Husband, Gong Yimo narrowed her eyes. She felt as if there was a tendon in her head that was constantly cramping in pain. Her hands loosened and tightened, tightened and loosened. Gong Dai felt her hesitation. Moreover, she held on to him with one hand and covered her head with the other. Obviously, she was in great pain. Gong Cheng's eyes turned cold. Gong Dai, kill her. Gong Cheng's deep voice made Gong Dai stunned. That's right. At such a close distance, Gong Yimo didn't move. She seemed to be struggling with something. At this time, it was easy for him to kill her. However, Gong Dai didn't move. He slowly reached out his hand and wrapped it around Gong Yimo's hand. He felt her tightness. It's okay, I'm here. Royal sister, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have left you alone. Gong Dai's cold voice was strangely able to calm Gong Yimo's mind. Her hand loosened a little. When everyone saw this scene, it was as if they were watching Prince Qi taming a beast. Royal sister, have you forgotten? We're going to get married soon. We won't be separated for generations to come, are you happy? Gong Dai's hand wrapped around hers. His clear black and white eyes flowed with a kind of cold gentleness. However, when everyone present heard Gong Dai's words, there was a strange silence. As long as they weren't fools, they knew that the emperor would never allow the princess to marry Prince Qi again after such a situation. Originally, the marriage between the princess and the prince was a matter that was deeply criticized by the people. The reason why the emperor agreed to this matter was, first, because he really loved this pair of children. Second, because they had made countless contributions. Third, and most importantly, their marriage would not endanger the country, other than their reputation being damaged. But now, Gong Yimo had gone crazy. No one could suppress her power. She was like a bomb. Presumably, even if the emperor died, he wouldn't agree to their marriage anymore. So when he said this, even someone as powerful as Gong Dai finally felt sour in his heart. He tightly wrapped Gong Yimo's hand, as if to give her strength. It wasn't easy for them to come to this step. Clearly, everything was perfect in the morning. Why did all those beautiful things turn into bubbles in this second? Gong Yimo suddenly let go of Gong Dai, but Gong Dai didn't let go of her hand. He firmly and affirmatively told her. Momo, no matter what, I will marry you. even if they were standing on the opposite side of the world. Chapter 588. Gong Yimo didn't know why, but she could hear the sadness in Gong Dai's voice. Her mind couldn't think of anything, and her body subconsciously leaned towards Gong Dai. She raised her hand stiffly, as if she wanted to comfort him. But in the next second, she was hugged tightly by Gong Dai. Gong Dai didn't care that her hands were stained with blood, nor did he care that she was covered in blood, nor did he care how many people she had killed. She wanted to be a saint, he loved her. She wanted to be a demon, he also loved her, he just loved her. He just loved her. The warmth of his body made Gong Yimo stunned, and the murderous aura on her body strangely converged. But at this time, Gong Qing couldn't bear it anymore. If Gong Dai didn't kill her, once Gong Yimo went crazy again, the consequences would be unimaginable. So even if he was unwilling, even if his heart ached, he didn't show it on his face. He gave a look to the commander of the Imperial Guards. That person received the order, and slowly unsheathed his sword, and gently walked behind Gong Yimo. The murderous aura overflowed, and Gong Yimo almost instantly felt it. Her eyes suddenly widened, and she hoarsely grinned. The next second, she was going to start a massacre. But Gong Dai, who was holding her, didn't even raise his head, knowing that she was starting to be irritable again. He endured the pain and hit the back of her head, knocking her unconscious. The commander of the Imperial Guards didn't know, and directly stabbed his sword towards Gong Yimo, but it was caught by Gong Dai's 2 fingers. He raised his head in panic, only to see Gong Dai holding Gong Yimo, looking at him with a cold murderous aura. When Gong Qing saw that Gong Yimo had fainted, he knew that Gong Dai must have knocked her out. Gong Dai obviously didn't want to hurt her, so even if he knew that Gong Yimo couldn't be left alive, he couldn't do anything to Gong Dai. The commander of the Imperial Guards retreated to the side, but his sword fell into Gong Dai's hand. Gong Dai held Gong Yimo in one hand, and held the sword in the other. His position was clear, and he said to the emperor in a deep voice, "Imperial Father, today's matter was an accident. Imperial Father, please spare royal sister." Accident? Gong Qing wanted to laugh. He glanced at Changxi's body in pain, but he couldn't laugh. Look at these people. Gong Cheng's eyes swept across the ground. There were no less than 100 corpses. It's not just them. Rivers of blood flowed in the Eastern Palace. Are these all accidents? Gong Dai tightened his grip on Gong Yimo. I'm willing to bring her to live in seclusion. Go into seclusion. What a nice way to put it. Gong Qing gasped for breath. His face was pale and weak. Jean, we are about to die. Gong Dai jerked his head up to look at him. How could this be? Didn't he say that he would be fine after 3 days? Gong Qing sneered, today's matter made me vomit blood. I don't need an imperial physician. I know that I have at most a week left to live. The more he laughed, the more bitter he felt. Who wouldn't want to live if they could? In the morning, he still had hope to live. Now, he felt that there was no vitality left in his body. But when it came down to it, he felt that the most unacceptable thing was not that he would die, but that the future of Dai Yu State was hiding a terrible danger. He knew the consequences, but he couldn't do anything about it. Gong Dai lowered his head to look at Gong Yimo. Royal sister is like this because she was poisoned. When she wakes up, she will be sober. Moreover, wasn't the royal sister poisoned because of the snow Ganoderma? Gong Cheng's heart ached. But he was rational. Even if this scene made him want to cry, he still had to ask. Will be sober when she wakes up. Then, will she relapse? This question was obviously the most important one. Was poisoned because of him, so Gong Qing didn't want to blame her. But if she went crazy from time to time, he couldn't let her go. Gong Ju was silent. He wanted to say that he wouldn't, but if Sister Gong went berserk again, under the barrage of arrows, only her corpse would be waiting for him. Gong Dai's silence proved everything. Gong Qing wailed and covered his head with his hand, almost fainting. The Imperial army was on standby, surrounding Gong Dai and Gong Yimo. Gong Dai stood there firmly. If they wanted to hurt Royal Sister, they would have to do it over his dead body. After a long time, Gong Qing said weakly. Gong Che brought this upon himself. But now, we don't know whether he's dead or alive. I am a lamp that has run out of oil. My children who are still alive are all cowardly and incompetent under the suppression of the two of you. And now, you say you want to live in seclusion. You want to live in seclusion for a woman who might go crazy at any time and risk being killed by her. Gong Dai was silent. Gong Qing sighed again. His voice was pale and weak in the wind. Poor him, who would have thought that he would be so helpless before death. Gong Dai ah. I know you don't have a good impression of the imperial family. I also know that everything you do is for Mo. Your ability is outstanding, and I have high hopes for you. I've given you opportunities time and time again, and you've done well. But in your heart, is there really only responsibility for Mo, and not for the country? You can abandon power as you wish, but do you want to watch as the Dai state falls into chaos? Gong Dai's lips moved. He wanted to say that in his heart, he only had responsibility for Royal Sister. But his father was dying, and the Crown Prince was in a coma. At this time, he really couldn't say that he didn't care about it and live in seclusion. If it was in the morning, he could easily say these two words. But now, saying these two words represented a kind of irresponsibility. He couldn't say it. Gong Qing glanced at Gong Yimo. There's obviously no cure for her poison. Otherwise, with your ability, she wouldn't have gone crazy in the Imperial Palace. Gong Qing paused, and his heart trembled. Since there's no cure, do you want her to go crazy from time to time? How many times can this Dai State's Imperial Palace withstand her bloodbath? I cannot kill her, but you can't marry her. If I die, and Gong Che doesn't wake up, you have to take responsibility. And she must be locked up in Zhao prison. When you find the antidote, she can see the light of day again. This is my greatest tolerance. What do you think? Gong Cheng's words were soft but powerful. Gong Dai also knew that this was Gong Cheng's greatest concession. But when he thought of not being able to marry her and having to lock her up in prison, Gong Dai couldn't bear it. Gong Cheng's voice suddenly turned cold. You can't bear it, but when she wakes up, she will agree to this. He understood Gong Yimo, so he was certain of this. If Gong Emo wakes up and knows that she's the one responsible for the massacre, she'll feel even more guilty. I know you have the ability to overthrow me as the Emperor with the Emperor's gun in your hand. But now, as long as I'm alive, I'm your father. I'm Dayu State's Emperor. As long as you don't rebel, you have to obey my orders. And even if it's Emoer, she will also support me. Do you want to go against Emoer's wishes? Gong Dai was silent. Suddenly, the sword in his hand fell, and he knelt down with Gong Yimo in his arms. There was a kind of unrepentant perseverance in his straight back. No matter what, I will marry her. Chapter 589. Gong Dai's words made Gong Cheng's throat taste fishy, and he almost spat out another mouthful of blood. He said so many words and gave in everywhere, but Gong Dai was still obstinate. Yes, in his eyes, there was only Gong Yimo, and no country, no power. Poor him, he felt that he didn't have long to live. But there was no one he could entrust to. Evil debt, could this be evil debt? Gong Dai hugged Gong Yimo and looked up at the emperor. Imperial father, with this son here, the country will not be in chaos. But royal sister, I must have her. He finally lowered his head. This son swears that I will never die in royal sister's hands. I will also watch over her and not let her hurt people again. I ask Imperial Father to marry her to me. Gong Cheng was so angry that he couldn't speak. It sounded nice that he wouldn't die in Emoer's hands, but was he Emoer's opponent? Emoer even wanted to kill him just now. Once she flared up, how could she not hurt people? The wind blew Gong Dai's hair. His back was still straight, indifferent, and maintained the last trace of respect for Gong Cheng. Imperial Father's good fortune fills the sky, you should let the Imperial physician treat you. You will be fine. His obstinacy made Gong Cheng's heart completely cold. He no longer had the strength to argue and said in a weak voice, "What if I die?" Gong Che was silent. Gong Cheng panted a few times and asked again, "What if I insist on killing her?" Gong Dai raised his head and looked at the emperor with a cold and firm gaze. "Then kill me first," Yi Zichen said. Gong Cheng finally couldn't hold back and spat out another mouthful of blood. His face was shrouded in the aura of death, but at this moment, he couldn't help but laugh. This was a sin. This was a blood debt from when he stole someone's newlywed wife and destroyed the country. If not, how could each of his sons be so obstinate? For a woman, for a girl he loved for many years, they abandoned the Daiyu state that he had protected for a lifetime. He had no face to face his ancestors. All of this was because of the sins he had committed, and the tribulation he had brought upon himself. The emperor kept vomiting blood, but at this time, no one dared to step forward and say, "Your Majesty, take care of your dragon body." Gong Dai looked at his father. In the end, a trace of helplessness appeared on his cold face. "If Gong Che doesn't wake up, I am willing to bear the burden of this vast territory. Father, please don't worry." Gong Cheng smiled bitterly. "How can I not be worried?" He seemed to be asking himself, but also seemed to be asking him. In the end, he let out a long sigh. "How can I not be worried?" Gong Xing waved his hand, and the palanquin under him slowly turned around, as if it could sense the emperor's mood. The person carrying the palanquin was silent, because the supreme man on the palanquin could no longer bear the slightest jolt. Gong Dai waited until the emperor was far away before he slowly stood up. The imperial guards looked at each other and heard Gong Dai's cold orders. "Clean this place up." After saying that, he no longer looked at the corpses on the ground and left with Gong Yimo in his arms. "How long is this road?" Gong Dai carried Gong Yimo out of the palace. This road seemed to be the longest road he had ever walked. He was afraid that before he even left the palace, he would hear the grievous news that the emperor would not live for long. He was afraid that if he heard that the crown prince had died from serious injuries, he would have no choice but to take responsibility and lock up the royal sister. He was afraid. He glanced at the little girl in his arms. She was so soft-hearted. If she woke up, how would she face this situation? When he thought of the royal sister's guilt and self-blame, he was terrified. He was afraid that because of her guilt, she would do something irreversible. Gong Dai looked at Gong Yimo's blood-stained face and sighed deeply. No matter how long this road was, he would take her to the end. 2 days later, Qi Manor. When Gong Yimo woke up and saw that she was in Qi Manor, she inexplicably breathed a sigh of relief. When she woke up, she was a little dazed. However, in the next second, the scarlet blood and blood-curdling screams entered her mind. For a moment, she thought that she had returned to the battlefield of her previous life. Was that a dream? She frowned and patted her head. She lowered her head and looked at her hands. They were very clean. Then she looked at her clothes. They were also very clean. She gently breathed a sigh of relief. However, in the next second, the scene of Changxi's tragic death suddenly appeared in her mind. Changxi died. The scene was very clear, so clear that it was as if she was there. She remembered how she had stabbed her fingers deep into the flesh of others. She remembered how she had finally pulled out the arrow from Changxi's chest. She remembered how he had knelt in front of her, his white hair scattered and his body covered in blood. Before he died, his mouth kept opening and closing as if he wanted to say something. "Princess, that was your father." Gong Yimo's expression suddenly became frightened. How could she have such a dream? No. It wasn't a dream. How did she come to Qi Manor? The feeling of obstruction when she had pulled out the arrow and the details of the blood splattering. She remembered it very clearly. It wasn't a dream. She had gone crazy. Gong Yimo looked at her hands again. She had killed hundreds of people, killed Changxi. Gong Dai came in with a bowl of medicine and found that Gong Yimo had woken up. His face lit up with joy. However, when he saw her sitting there in a daze, his heart suddenly sank. "Royal sister." Gong Dai's voice caused Gong Yimo to raise her head. She looked at Gong Dai in a daze, as if she wanted to see something from him. Gong Dai's expression didn't change as he sat beside her. "You have been unconscious for 2 days. Come, drink this medicine." This medicine was developed by a group of famous doctors. It was a medicine that calmed people down. He didn't know if it had any effect on her. However, Gong Yimo obediently drank the medicine without making a fuss or asking any questions. Gong Dai couldn't bear it. If it was in the past, she would definitely act coquettishly before obediently drinking such a bitter medicine. However, at this moment, there was only unease and fear on her pale face. Her eyes were wide open as she looked at him in fear. It was as if he would say something that she couldn't accept. Gong Dai's heart ached for her. He hugged her and lay down for a while. Holding her in his arms, he asked softly, "Are you hungry? I've asked someone to prepare porridge and your favorite dishes." Gong Yimo lay on the pillow and shook her head. She timidly grabbed his collar. Just as she was about to say something, she saw the dark circles under Gong Dai's eyes. Her heart suddenly ached. He had been back for more than 10 days. Just the backlog of work on his hands was enough to tire him out. He still had to prepare for the wedding and find medicine for her. That wasn't all, but she had a problem. For the past few days, because of her, he probably hadn't had a good night's sleep. No, perhaps he hadn't slept at all. Even a person made of iron couldn't stand such torment, so even if she really wanted to know if the things in her mind were real, if she had really almost killed Gong Che, if she had almost killed the emperor, if she had really killed Changxi. She really wanted to know, but being hugged by Gong Dai at this moment, her fingers touching his closed eyes turned into another sentence. "Gong Dai." She pursed her lips. "Am I making you feel tired?" Chapter 590. Gong Dai immediately opened his eyes and looked at Gong Yimo, who was full of self-blame. She carefully wanted to touch him, but did not dare to approach him. His heart instantly melted. He leaned forward and kissed her forehead. "Silly, what are you thinking? How could it be?" However, Gong Yimo lowered her head and the hand that was grabbing onto his collar loosened weakly. "I think I'm a troublemaker. I'm always making things difficult for you." Gong Dai smiled and hugged her. It was as if all his fatigue had disappeared. "Silly Momo. When I'm with you, there's only happiness and no pain." He thought of something and held Gong Yimo's little face as he told her seriously. "There's nothing that can stump your man. There's also nothing that your man can't handle. But all of this is built on you being by my side. Do you understand? He looked at her timid little face and his voice couldn't be any softer. If it weren't for you, I would go crazy. With you, nothing is important. Gong Yimo pursed her lips as if she wanted to cry, but she didn't dare to. You really won't abandon me because you think I'm troublesome. At this moment, her heart was greatly stimulated. Gong Dai seemed to be her last life-saving straw. She clung to him and wished she could be tied to him all the time. She opened her mouth and said pitifully, I only have you, Momo. Gong Che suddenly pressed her down and kissed her non-stop. The two of them were entangled. He seemed to want to kiss away all of her uneasiness and pull her tightly into his arms, never to be separated again. After a long while, the two of them were a little emotional. Gong Dai saw that Gong Yimo's cheeks were gradually turning red and he lovingly bit her lips that were a little swollen from being sucked. Are you still saying stupid things? He pretended to be strict with his cold ink-black eyes. When he spoke loudly, Gong Yimo's neck shrank back as if she was frightened. Gong Dai's voice immediately lowered by an octave. He caressed her face affectionately and said, Royal sister, I've always only had you. That was the case in the past, now, and in the future. When Gong Yimo heard this, she calmed down a little. She obediently hugged Gong Dai and lay on the bed. It seemed that she had never been so obedient before. She was so obedient that it made Gong Dai's heart ache. Let's sleep. Gong Yimo patted Gong Dai's shoulder and hugged him in her arms. Gong Dai was stunned and wanted to get up. The royal sister hadn't eaten yet, and he still had a lot of things to do. He really couldn't delay it for too long. Who knew that Gong Yimo would suddenly become unyielding? Go to sleep, Gong Ju. If you don't listen to me then I won't want you. When Gong Dai saw that Gong Yimo was willing to joke, he felt a lot more at ease. He was indeed tired. In Gong Yimo's arms, he felt a kind of supreme peace. Therefore, his tense nerves quietly relaxed. Just sleep for a while, it should be fine. Just a while, but soon, Gong Dai's breathing gradually became heavy. Apparently, he fell asleep. He was really tired. Gong Yimo looked at his sleeping face, and her heart suddenly ached. She planted a kiss on his forehead. Gong Dai. Forgive me. I have to face it, or I won't be able to forgive myself. The imperial palace was overcast with gloom. Emperor Gong's body was thinning at a speed visible to the naked eye. When he woke up a few days ago, although he was thin, his eyes were full of vitality. But these days, there was only death in his eyes. He was as thin as a skeleton, and his cheeks were sunken. Gong Che also didn't wake up. The Empress watched over the Crown Prince every day. She blamed herself every day and often scolded herself. If she had told Che the truth earlier, and not forced him to pursue Gong Yimo, Gong Che wouldn't have been forced to such a point. He wouldn't have done such a thing because he couldn't get what he wanted. It was all her fault, her fault. Gong Yimo entered the imperial palace under such circumstances. The imperial palace was in a mess. The emperor and crown prince were unconscious, and the empress was muddle-headed. Therefore, the palace servants were terrified when they saw Gong Yimo. They wanted to report back, but they didn't know who to report to. Gong Yimo arrived at Zhaoyang Hall unimpeded. When the commander of the imperial guards saw her, his scalp went numb. He didn't forget Gong Yimo's appearance when she killed people. One in each hand, piercing through their hearts, like an Asura that climbed up from hell. Therefore, he subconsciously blocked in front of Gong Yimo. Princess, you can't go in. Gong Yimo's expression was cold. Ever since she entered the imperial palace and heard the emperor's grievous news, she repeatedly asked herself in her heart if she was the one who caused all this. The answer was yes. Even if she didn't want to face it, she had to admit that the smell of blood in the imperial palace that hadn't dispersed was because of her. "You can't stop me," she calmly stated a fact. The commander of the Imperial Guard's face stiffened. He couldn't deny that if he made a move, the princess would have already killed him before he could gather his men. It was meaningless for him to stop her, but he still didn't retreat. His Majesty took the medicine and just rested. "You can't go in." He braced himself and said. Gong Yimo glanced at him. At this time, her face was pale. When the light shone on her body, it seemed transparent. When she raised her eyes, it gave people a feeling of fragility. "I won't kill people." She sighed. "I've acted up once. I won't act up again so quickly. Let me in." Hearing the second half of the sentence, the man was a little relaxed. He believed that Gong Yimo wouldn't lie, so after a little hesitation, he let her in. A stronger smell of medicine came. The difference was that she felt hope before, but the moment she saw Gong Qing, she only saw despair. "Get out," Gong Yimo ordered. Everyone looked at each other in dismay. Without Changxi, they didn't dare to disobey the princess. In the end, they all retreated, leaving the space for the father and daughter. She sat beside Gong Qing tiredly. Before, Gong Qing still smiled and told her that he would be fine, that he would get through it, and that he would confer a title to her child, but she didn't expect that when he finally got through the most dangerous moment, she would make him so angry that his body collapsed. At this moment, she hated herself so much. If she hadn't been lucky and stayed in the imperial palace with peace of mind after seeing that the poison didn't act up, how could this happen? Changxi. When eunuch Changxi was young, he would always leave anything delicious for her. Every time she went to steal the emperor's private stash of fine wine, he was such a loyal person, but he turned a blind eye to it. In the end, when the emperor found out, he would say that he was greedy and secretly drank the wine. In return, he would be scolded by imperial father. And those people who died unjustly, which one of them wasn't born by their parents? This world may be divided into 3, 6, and 9 classes, but in the eyes of the relatives of those who died, they were the highest existence. How many families had she destroyed in an instant? The pent-up anger that hadn't appeared for a long time surged up. Gong Yimo felt that she couldn't breathe. Staying in the imperial palace, everything that happened before became very clear. The appearance of those people, the faces of those who died with their eyes open, made her feel like her heart was being squeezed, and her whole person was in a sea of fire. Chapter 591. Seriously speaking, at the end of her previous life, Gong Yimo returned without her armor. There was a reason why she lost her will. The nightmares that haunted her, the irritation in her heart, and the uneasiness of being cursed and hated by others, were all symptoms of post-war stress syndrome. Many people who had experienced war would encounter this kind of psychological illness after going to the battlefield. It manifested as a lack of fighting spirit, like a walking corpse, or becoming abnormally irritable, drinking, killing, and so on. After Gong Yimo died and was reborn, she got a chance to start over, which made her psychological illness a lot better. Starting over, she was full of hope for everything. But now, the entire palace was filled with gloom, and the imperial physician left an assertion that Gong Qing would not live for long. Gong Yimo could not redeem all of this, but she could not escape. In the process of facing it, self-blame and guilt greatly stimulated her heart, stimulating her to recall the past that she did not want to remember. So when she woke up today, she was so uneasy, as if Gong Dai was her last salvation. But when she received a trace of comfort from Gong Dai at Qi Manor, it instantly disappeared when she saw Gong Qing. How could he be so thin? He was like a large skeleton. The silky yellow robe on his body highlighted the outline of his skeleton. All the fat on his body was quickly consumed in the past few days, and his body was damaged to the point where it could no longer absorb new fat, so he would only become thinner, and finally die of starvation. Tears unconsciously fell on the back of Gong Cheng's hand. Why was he so thin, so scarily thin? Gong Cheng's hand moved, as if his heart felt something. He saw the person sitting by his bed crying. How could he be reconciled? If it were not for the chaos caused by her, he could still be alive. How could he not be angry? If it were not for her, Changshi would not have died. His 2 sons would not be hostile because of her. If it were not for her, he would not be in a dilemma, saving one and hurting the other. How could he not hate her? She was so dangerous, but he cared about Gong Dai, so he could not kill her. If he kept her alive, his Daiyu state's rivers and mountains would be hanging on a knife's edge. Sometimes, he would also think, how could there be such a troublesome woman in this world? He was simply a scourge. It was God's punishment, the Snow Clan's curse, retribution. But looking at her silently crying by his bedside, thousands of emotions flashed through Gong Cheng's heart. In the end, he still couldn't bear it. She was still a child. She had already tried her best to do everything well, but she didn't know that there was nothing perfect in this world. When Gong Yimo saw that Gong Che had woken up, she couldn't hold it in anymore. Her cries grew louder and louder. Not for anything else, but for Gong Che's sunken eyes and his mouth that was so thin that it couldn't close. She was so upset that she couldn't stop herself from crying. Gong Cheng looked at her with a pair of terrifyingly big eyes. She cried more and more miserably. Gong Cheng was a little flustered. He didn't know what expression to use to face Gong Yimo. At first glance, he looked a little innocent. Don't cry. He did not know how to coax little girls, but this was the first time he had seen Gong Yimo cry so hard. I am not dead yet, Gong Yimo cried even louder. It was all her fault. It was all her fault. Although she didn't know what exactly she was blaming herself for, she felt an unspeakable sense of guilt and remorse. If she had known earlier, she wouldn't have come back. She should have left Daiyu State far away. Perhaps Gong Ching would still be alive and well. Don't cry, Gong Ching sighed. At this time, he sat up with some effort. Because of the lack of fat, when he moved, the friction between his bones made him feel extremely uncomfortable. But he just frowned. Half lying on the dragon bed, he reached out to wipe Gong Yimo's tears. Gong Yimo's ears were very sharp. She clearly heard the sound of Gong Cheng's bones rubbing against each other. She wanted to help him up, but she didn't know where to start. It was as if she exerted a little force, Gong Cheng would fall apart. So she could only cry like a helpless child. Gong Cheng didn't dare to touch her face. He always felt that if he touched her face, it would probably be flooded. He closed his eyes and waited for Gong Yimo to finish crying. Gong Yimo was just venting, but it wasn't endless. She cried for a while and gradually calmed down. It was as if her spirit had been sucked out of her. Under the silence, there was only undissolvable melancholy. Imperial Father. Do you hate me? She thought a lot when she came. She felt that Gong Ching should hate her. If it wasn't for her, Gong Che wouldn't be like this. If it wasn't for her, he wouldn't be on the verge of death. Changshi wouldn't die, and those Imperial guards wouldn't die. Sometimes, she suddenly wondered if Gong Dai and Gong Che's lives would be different if she didn't exist in her previous life. Would it be better? Gong Ching didn't open his eyes. He seemed to be thinking with his eyes closed. After a while, he spoke softly. When I first opened my eyes and saw you, I still hated you. The corners of Gong Yimo's eyes were red. When she heard that, she lowered her head even more. Gongqing smiled gently and opened his eyes. But after you sat here for a while, suddenly don't hate you anymore. Gong Yimo looked at Gongqing in surprise, as if she wanted to see if he was telling the truth. She almost killed him. Why didn't he hate her? Perhaps when a person is about to die, he sees things more clearly. Gongqing's voice was very soft. He looked at Gong Yimo and suddenly had a desire to speak. He was disappointed with his two sons. They only cared about personal matters and didn't care about the big picture. However, he loved and hated Gong Yimo. His love came from her, but his hatred came from his sons. But at this moment, he knew that he didn't have long to live. He didn't know why, but he suddenly saw things more lightly. He was no longer so constrained by life and death. He really did it. Without you, I might have died a long time ago. Back then, Nan of Gojoseon offered me addictive tobacco. If you didn't teach Gong Dai well, I wouldn't have escaped that disaster. I might have died a long time ago. He wasn't wrong. After all, compared to his previous life, Gongqing had lived a few more years. But Gong Yimo just couldn't forgive herself. He could have lived longer. Gongqing sighed softly. You have made countless contributions for the country, for the world. In a few years, the world will be prosperous and the 4 countries will prosper. Half of this is due to your contribution. So, you are very good. She was so good that even his most outstanding child liked her. Moreover, for her, he could give up anything. Previously, he didn't understand. He felt that nothing could be compared to his country. However, after thinking about it, he understood. With such an outstanding daughter, no outstanding man would give up on her. It was just like how Gong Che refused to let go even though he didn't receive any response. This was because no man would let go after falling in love with her, unless he wasn't by her side. If he was, he would definitely fight until the end. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.